Pilot sees boy eating leftovers on plane. The reason makes him cry. Robert Anderson felt the weight of his 42-year career that night. Flight 372 was crossing the American sky toward Denver while most passengers slept, and he took the opportunity to take his routine walk down the aisle. It was while passing the last row that his gaze caught a subtle movement. A boy of slender appearance, no more than 8 years old, was picking up a piece of bread left on the tray of an empty seat with his small hands. The boy quickly glanced around before bringing the food to his mouth, chewing slowly as if wanting to make it last as long as possible. Robert stopped. He observed more closely. The boy wore a faded brown t-shirt, jeans with patches on the knees, and had messy brown hair. His dark eyes seemed too large for his thin face. The captain approached with measured steps, not wanting to scare the child. When he got closer, he saw that the boy wasn't just eating that bread. He had saved another piece in his pants pocket, along with some cookies someone had left behind. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to be discreet, but hunger was stronger than caution. "Good evening," Robert said softly. The boy was startled, dropping a cookie on the floor. His eyes widened and he quickly tried to hide what was in his hand. "Sorry, sir. I wasn't doing anything wrong. These things were going to be thrown away anyway." Robert felt something tighten in his chest. The boy's voice sounded tired, carrying a maturity that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "It's okay, son. No need to apologize. What's your name?" "Ethan, sir." "And are you traveling alone, Ethan?" The boy nodded, lowering his eyes to his lap. Robert looked around, confirming there was no adult accompanying the child. How was that possible? Normally, unaccompanied children traveled with a special airline service with constant supervision. "Excuse me a moment," said Robert, walking to the crew area. He found Amanda, the head flight attendant, organizing the snack carts. She was about 35, with black hair tied in an impeccable bun, and had worked with him for nearly a decade. "Amanda, that boy in the back, the one in the brown t-shirt, what's his situation?" The flight attendant consulted her clipboard, running her fingers through the passenger list. "Ethan Michael Johnson, 8 years old, traveling with a company courtesy ticket." "Courtesy? How so?" Amanda sighed, lowering her voice. "It was a somewhat unusual situation, Captain. The boy showed up at the company office at Midway Airport 3 days ago. He waited in the reception area, sitting in those plastic chairs, all day. He came back the next day, and the day after that. The supervisor felt sorry for him and talked to him. His mother had managed to save money for half the fare. He really wanted to travel, said it was urgent. The company decided to cover the rest." Robert pressed his lips together. He knew of cases like this, but usually there was more supervision. "And he's traveling completely alone. The mother signed all the necessary documents. He has a guardian waiting at arrival. Everything within the rules, but without the full accompaniment service because she couldn't pay the additional fee." The captain returned to where Ethan was. The boy was now slowly nibbling on the piece of bread he had saved, making each bite last. There was something profoundly wrong with that scene. It wasn't just the hunger. It was the way he ate, with a silent gratitude for every crumb. "Ethan, haven't you eaten anything on the flight until now?" The boy shook his head. "I don't have money to buy food, sir, but it's okay. I managed to save some things before boarding." "And what did you eat today?" "Today?" Ethan thought for a moment. "My mom gave me bread with margarine this morning before I left home. That was—" He looked at the big clock on the cabin wall. "A long time ago." Robert felt his throat tighten. That boy hadn't eaten for over 12 hours, yet he was worried about not accepting anything that cost money. "Are you going to visit someone in Denver?" Ethan's eyes lit up for the first time. "I'm going to meet my dad, sir. It's been a long time since I've seen him." "How long?" 5 years. I was 3 when he left. I barely remember him well, but my mom kept photos. She says I have the same way of smiling as him." Robert sat in the seat next to the boy. There was something about that child's story that deeply bothered him, as if puzzle pieces were starting to form in his mind, but he still couldn't see the full picture. "And does your father know you're coming?" Ethan bit his lower lip. "Not exactly. I mean, he doesn't know I got the ticket, But he always told my mom in his letters that when things got better, he would come get us. But it's been so long. So I thought maybe I could go to him, to help things get better faster, you know? Robert's heart beat faster and faster. There was something too familiar about that story. The way the boy talked about his absent father, the promise to return when things got better, the waiting that stretched for years. How did you find his address? My grandmother had kept a letter he sent 2 years ago. She passed away last year, but before she left, she showed me where she kept important things, said that one day I would need it. I found the address in the letter. Ethan reached into the small worn backpack he carried and pulled out a yellowed envelope. Carefully, like someone handling a fragile treasure, he showed the letter to Robert. The handwriting was rushed, almost illegible in some parts, but the address in the upper corner was clear. Robert took the letter with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the words written years ago, and something inside him broke. He knew that handwriting. He knew the way of forming the words, the specific slant of certain letters. It was impossible, but it was there in front of him. Your father's name, Ethan, what is it? David Johnson, sir. David August Johnson. The lady who works at the airline office said that's a very common name, but I'm sure I'll recognize him when I see him. My mom always says he has eyes that seem to always be thinking about something far away. The world seemed to spin around Robert. David August Johnson. It couldn't be. After so many years, after everything that happened, it wasn't possible that the boy sitting next to him was... Sir, are you okay? You look a bit pale. Robert forced a smile, but his hands still trembled as he returned the letter to Ethan. I'm fine, son. I was just thinking here. Do you know what your father does? What's his profession? My mum said he worked with planes. Not as a pilot, but helping transport things. He had a small air transport company with a friend, but something went wrong and they split up. It was after that that my dad left. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Each of the boy's words was like a needle in Robert's chest. The air transport company, the partner, the split. He knew every detail of that story because he had been part of it. David Johnson wasn't just a common name on an old letter. It was the name of the man who had been his best friend for over a decade, his business partner, practically a brother. And Robert had never imagined that David had a son. The sudden turbulence shook the plane. Ethan instinctively grabbed the armrest, and that's when Robert saw it. On the boy's small hand, hanging from a thin, worn chain, was a pendant, a small metal airplane with details Robert would recognize anywhere. He himself had an identical chain stored at home, a gift David had commissioned for both of them when they started the company together almost 20 years ago. That pendant, Robert pointed with a choked voice. Where did you get it? It was from my father. My mother kept it for me. She said that as long as I had this, a part of him would always be with me. It's the only thing I have of him, besides the photos. Robert had to stand up. He muttered some excuse about needing to check something in the cockpit and practically fled down the aisle. His legs could barely support him. He locked himself in the crew restroom and leaned his hands on the sink, looking at his own reflection in the mirror. The eyes staring back at him were red, not from tiredness but from held-back tears. With trembling hands, he opened the small cabinet where he kept his personal belongings during flights. At the bottom of his bag, wrapped in a cloth handkerchief, was the pendant identical to Ethan's. Robert hadn't worn it for years, but he could never bring himself to get rid of it. It was the memory of a friendship that had been stronger than any blood tie, and that had shattered because of money, pride, and misunderstandings. A knock on the door startled him. "Captain, is everything okay?" It was Amanda's voice, concerned. Robert opened the door, trying to regain his composure. "Sorry, Amanda. I just needed a moment." The flight attendant watched him carefully. They had worked together long enough for her to notice when something was wrong. "It has to do with the boy, doesn't it? Ethan, Robert hesitated, but the words came out before he could stop them. "I know his father. Knew. We haven't spoken in many years." Amanda's eyes widened. "Really? What an incredible coincidence." "I don't know if it's that incredible." Robert ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he made when he was nervous. "David and I, We were more than friends, we were partners. We started a small aircraft charter company together. It was right after I started flying commercially. He handled the administrative side, and I flew when I had time off. It was our dream since flight school. What happened? What always happens? Money, or the lack of it. The company was growing, but we needed a big investment to buy another plane. I had saved up a good amount of money, was willing to put everything into the business. David also said he had managed to gather his part. But when it was time to make the investment, I found out he didn't have the money he promised. He had spent it on other things, with priorities he never told me about. Robert paused, his voice growing heavier with the memory. We argued badly. I said terrible things, accused him of being irresponsible, of lying to me. He tried to explain, but I was blinded by anger. We lost the deal we were about to close. The company ended months later. Each of us went our separate ways and never spoke again. That was 6 years ago. And you didn't know he had a son? No idea. David was private about his personal life, but I thought I knew him. Now I realize that maybe the money he said he had but didn't was used for something more important. A family, perhaps. A child who needed him. Amanda put her hand on the captain's shoulder. And now? What are you going to do? I don't know. But that boy is traveling alone to meet a father he hasn't seen in 5 years, eating leftover food because he has no money, and I might be part of the reason why David couldn't provide a better life for him. You can't think like that. Yes, I can. If I had been less proud, if I had listened to what David had to say that day, maybe things would be different. For him, for that boy, for all of us. Robert took a deep breath, trying to organize the chaotic thoughts that filled his mind. I need to finish the flight. After that, I'll have to figure out how to help this kid. When he returned to the passenger aisle, he found Ethan still awake, looking out the window. The city lights below twinkled like earthly stars. The boy was carefully holding that pendant as if it were a protective amulet. Robert approached and sat down beside him again. Ethan, did you eat anything besides that bread? No, sir, but it's okay. I saved a few more things here in my backpack. I'll eat when I arrive. What if I asked them to bring a meal for you? The airline offers dinners. Ethan's face twisted into an expression that mixed desire and refusal. I can't accept, sir. Those meals cost money. My mother always taught me not to accept charity. She says we might be poor, but we have dignity. We work for what we eat. Robert felt a lump in his throat. Those words seemed to echo from a distant past, from conversations he himself had had with David about pride and dignity. David came from a humble family, had grown up knowing the value of every penny, and apparently had passed these values on to his son. What if it wasn't charity? Robert suggested. What if you worked for this meal? Ethan looked at him with curiosity and a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Work? How? Well, we have a very full flight today. The crew could use some help collecting some empty trays, checking if passengers need blankets. Simple things that a smart boy like you could do. In return, you'd get a full meal. What do you think? Ethan's face lit up for the first time since Robert had met him. It wasn't just joy for the food, but for the recognition that he could contribute, that he wouldn't just be receiving without giving anything in return. I accept, sir. I promise I'll do a good job. Robert called Amanda and explained the arrangement. The flight attendant immediately understood what he was doing and agreed with a warm smile. Within minutes, Ethan was wearing a small improvised apron, helping to collect empty trays with all the care in the world. He moved through the aisle with adorable seriousness, politely asking passengers if they needed anything, thanking each response with a shy smile. Some awake passengers watched the scene with tenderness. An elderly lady in row 15 commented to her husband that it was rare to see such well-behaved children these days. A businessman who had initially grumbled when woken by the boy ended up smiling and saying that Ethan was doing a great job. After about 40 minutes of helping, Amanda took Ethan to the service area and presented him with a full tray. Rice, beans, a generous piece of roasted chicken, salad, and even dessert. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of so much food. Is all this for me? You worked hard. You deserve every bit, Amanda replied, gently touching the boy's head. Ethan sat on a small folding stool used by the crew and began to eat, but not with the voracity Robert expected from a hungry child. On the contrary, he ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a real banquet. Between bites, he carefully saved some pieces in folded napkins. "Ethan, why are you saving food? You can eat it all," said Robert, watching closely. "It's just that if I save a little, I can eat tomorrow too. That way I won't be hungry until I find my father." Robert had to turn his face away to hide the tears threatening to fall. That 8-year-old boy had more concern for the future than many adults. He was thinking about survival, about stretching resources, about making sure he'd have something to eat the next day. What kind of life had that child led to develop this kind of thinking? "Tell me more about your mother, Ethan. What does she do?" The boy swallowed a piece of chicken before answering, his eyes shining as he spoke about her. "My mother is the hardest working person I know, sir. She works cleaning at Midway Airport. She starts at 5 in the morning and finishes at 2 in the afternoon. Then she goes to another job at a diner, where she stays until 8 at night. And she still does cleaning at some people's houses on weekends." 3 jobs? "Yes. She says she needs to work hard to give me a good life so I can study and be someone in life. I study at a public school near home. My grades are good. My teacher, Ms. Emily, says I'm one of the best students in the class in math." Robert felt his chest tighten even more. While he lived comfortably with his pilot's salary, well-applied investments, and a guaranteed retirement, the woman who had been left by David was struggling with 3 jobs to raise their son alone. "And your father, does he send money? Does he help in any way?" Ethan lowered his eyes, playing distractedly with his food. "No, sir. My mother never speaks badly of him in front of me. But I know we're struggling. Sometimes I hear her crying in her room at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. She doesn't know I wake up and hear. Once I heard her talking on the phone with my aunt, saying she had sent letters asking for help, but never received an answer." "How many letters did she send?" "I don't know exactly, but I saw her writing several times. She always put them in a yellow envelope and asked Mr. Richard, the neighbor who has a car, to take them to the post office. She spent money we didn't have to send those letters. I saw her counting coins before giving them to Mr. Richard." Robert closed his eyes for a moment. David had received letters asking for help. Letters from a desperate woman trying to raise her son alone. And from what Ethan described, David had never responded, had never sent any kind of support. This didn't sound like the man Robert had known. David had always been proud, yes, but he was also responsible and honest. What had happened to him all these years? "Your father, did he sometimes reply to the letters? Did you see any response from him?" "I saw some, yes. My grandmother kept them. He said he was trying to get organized, that things had gotten difficult after his company closed. He said he wanted to come back, but needed to be able to support us first. He didn't want to come back a failure, that's what he wrote in one of the letters. My grandmother cried when she read that." The puzzle was beginning to form in Robert's mind. David hadn't abandoned his family for lack of love or irresponsibility. He had left driven by wounded pride and shame of failure, and the more time passed, the harder it became to return. How do you return to a family after years without giving support? How do you face a child who grew up without you? How do you look into the eyes of the woman who stayed alone, holding everything together? "Ethan, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, sir." "Why did you decide to go look for your father now? What changed?" The boy stayed silent for a long moment. His small fingers nervously played with the napkin where he had wrapped pieces of food. "My mother is sick," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. "She doesn't know that I know, but I overheard when she went to the clinic doctor last month. I had missed school because I had a stomachache, and she took me along. While I waited outside, I heard the doctor saying she needed to get some tests done, that she was working too much and her body couldn't take it. He said she needs to rest, slow down." Tears started rolling down Ethan's face, but he didn't wipe them away. He kept talking, as if it were a relief to finally be able to tell someone. "But she can't rest, sir. If she stops working, we don't have money to pay the rent to buy food. So I thought if I found my father, If I told him about the situation, maybe he could help. Even if he doesn't want to come back to us, even if he has another family now, maybe he could send some money. Anything to help my mom not have to work so hard. Robert could no longer hold back his own tears. Here was an 8-year-old boy, traveling alone across the country, eating leftover food, all of this not for himself, but to try to save his mother. There wasn't a drop of self-pity in Ethan's words, just genuine worry and unconditional love. "You're a very brave boy, Ethan." "I'm not brave, sir. I'm very scared. Scared my father won't want to see me. Scared he's forgotten about us. Scared I won't be able to help my mom. But being scared is normal, right? My grandma used to say that being brave isn't about not being scared, but doing what needs to be done even when you are scared." "Your grandma was a wise woman." "Yes, she was. She passed away last year, had heart problems. She lived with us in a small room my mom rented. She helped by taking care of me while my mom worked, helped with homework, told stories, made food with the little we had. When she passed, it was really hard. My mom had to pay for the funeral, and we got even tighter on money. Robert realized he was facing a story of accumulated suffering, of a family that had been pushed to the edge of survival. And he, who had money, stability, comfort, had been part of it. If he had kept in touch with David, if he had overcome his wounded pride, maybe he could have helped. Maybe that child wouldn't be eating leftovers now and making a desperate journey to find an absent father. The co-pilot called Robert on the intercom, informing him they were about an hour from Denver. The captain needed to return to the cockpit, but first he looked at Ethan with renewed determination. "Ethan, I'm going to help you find your father. And it's not charity, okay? It's because I think somehow I owe it to you." "Oh? Why, sir?" "It's a long story. But you deserve to know. When we land, I'll tell you everything." Robert returned to the cockpit, but his mind was far from the plane's controls. He sat in the captain's chair, put on his headphones, and pretended to check the instruments, but all he could see was that boy's thin face, the eyes hopeful and scared at the same time. "Everything all right, Captain?" asked Jason, the co-pilot, a man about 30 years old in his second year flying commercially. "I met my best friend's son today," Robert said, surprising himself with the honesty. "Or rather, the man who was my best friend. We haven't spoken in 6 years. Is that the boy Mariana was helping?" "Yes, he's traveling alone to find his father, and I was part of the reason why that father couldn't take care of him all these years." Jason looked at the captain with curiosity, but had the wisdom not to press for details. "Sometimes life gives us second chances to fix our mistakes," said the co-pilot. "I hope that's the case." The remaining flight time passed in a blur of thoughts and memories. Robert remembered when he met David at flight school. Both were young, full of dreams about flying and conquering the world. David was quieter, more calculating, while Robert was expansive and optimistic. They formed an unlikely friendship that strengthened over the years. When Robert started flying commercially, and David decided he didn't want to be a pilot, but rather work in the administrative side of aviation, they maintained their friendship. It was during a barbecue at Robert's house that the idea for the charter company came up. They had drunk a few too many beers, were talking about dreams, and suddenly it was no longer just talk. They started making plans, calculating investments, looking for lawyers to open the company. It took 2 years until they managed to save enough money to buy the first plane, a used single engine, but in good condition. The company operated from a small rented hangar at a secondary airport near Chicago. Robert flew during his off days from commercial work, doing small freight runs, transporting urgent documents, executives to meetings in nearby cities. David took care of everything else, from accounting to finding new clients. The business started to do well. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. They were proud of every successful flight, every satisfied client, every penny earned honestly. They were building something together, a legacy they could pass on. That's when the opportunity to expand came up. A big client was interested in a long-term contract, but they needed more capacity. This meant buying another plane, a larger, more modern twin engine. The investment was considerable, about $300,000 between the purchase, renovations, and licenses. Robert had $150,000 saved. David said he had his share too, They scheduled the meeting with the seller, arranged all the additional financing. But 3 days before signing the contract, David showed up with a confession. He didn't have the 150,000. He only had 80,000. The rest of the money had been used on something he refused to explain. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Robert exploded. He shouted horrible things, accused David of lying, breaking trust, sabotaging their dream. David tried to explain, but Robert wouldn't listen. Said if David didn't trust him enough to tell the truth about where the money was, then they couldn't be partners anymore. They couldn't be friends anymore. The company was dissolved months later. They sold the plane, split the leftover money, each went their own way. Robert continued flying commercially, was promoted to captain, had a solid and respectable career. He never heard from David again until that night, when his son appeared eating leftovers at the back of the plane. Now, with the perspective of years and Ethan's words, Robert began to understand what might have happened. David had a family. He had a wife, probably already pregnant, or maybe with a newborn baby. The money he said he had but didn't had probably been used on necessary things for that family. Maybe medical expenses, maybe furniture for an apartment, maybe just food and rent. And David, being the proud man he was, couldn't admit to Robert that he had chosen family over business. Not because he didn't value their dream, but because the family needed it more at that moment. And when Robert exploded, when he said all those horrible things, David must have realized there was no going back. The friendship was broken. The company was lost. He had to rebuild his life from scratch. How many years had David spent carrying that guilt? How many nights had he stayed awake thinking about what could have been different? And when things got even tougher financially, when he realized he couldn't provide for his family the way he wanted, the shame must have become unbearable. So he left, promising to return when things got better. But things probably never got better, and the more time passed, the more impossible it became to go back. The plane began its descent into Denver. Robert performed the procedure on autopilot, his mind still lost in thought. When the wheels touched the runway with a slight jolt, he felt he was about to touch a closed chapter of his life as well. There was no more running from the past. He was about to confront it in the form of an 8-year-old boy who ate leftover food and held onto an airplane pendant as if it were his most precious possession. After most passengers had disembarked, Robert asked Amanda to take Ethan to the crew lounge at the airport. He had calls to make, arrangements to handle. First, he called his wife, Emily, explaining that he would need to stay in Denver longer than planned. She understood, as she always did. 20 years of marriage had taught her that sometimes life presented situations that couldn't be ignored. Then Robert called the number listed as the emergency contact in Ethan's record. It was the boy's mother's cell phone. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice tired but alert. "Hello? Miss Sarah Johnson." "Yes, this is she. Who is this?" "My name is Robert Anderson. I'm the captain of the flight your son Ethan was traveling on. He's fine, don't worry. But I'd like to talk to you about a few things." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Robert could hear the background noise of a busy place, probably the diner where Sarah worked. "Did Ethan arrive safely?" "Arrive. Is there someone to pick him up there?" "Actually, about that, did you list anyone responsible to pick up Ethan at the airport?" Sarah's voice faltered. "I put down his father's name, David. I know it's wrong, that he doesn't know the boy is coming, but it was the only way to get the right papers for Ethan to travel alone. I didn't have the money to travel with him, and I don't know anyone else in Denver. The last time I got a letter from David 2 years ago, he lived at the address listed in Ethan's documents. Do you have any idea if David is still at that address?" "I don't know. I sent letters, but I never got a response. But I had no other choice. Ethan was determined to go, and I couldn't let my son travel with no destination at all. I know I was irresponsible, but I was desperate." Robert took a deep breath. He could feel that woman's anguish through the phone. "Miss Sarah, I know David, or at least I used to. We were very close friends years ago. By any chance, do you know about the air transport company he had?" "Yes, I do. It was because of the end of that company that everything went wrong. He came home devastated that day, saying he had lost the business, that he had lost his best friend, that he had failed me and Ethan. He was depressed for weeks. He tried to find work, but he was so down that no one wanted to hire him. The savings ran out. The rent fell behind. It was a terrible time. And when did he leave? About a year later. He said he was going to Denver because he'd heard about job opportunities there. He promised to send money as soon as he got settled. At first he sent something, not much, but it helped. Then he stopped. The letters became rarer, until they stopped coming completely. Do you know what happened? Why did he stop sending news? I don't know exactly. In the last letter I received, he talked about being unemployed again, about living in a small place, sharing with other people. He said he was too ashamed to come back, that he couldn't look at his son knowing he was a failure. Robert felt a pang in his chest. David was destroyed, living in precarious conditions, but still too proud to ask for help or return to his family. Ms. Sarah, I will take Ethan to the address you have. I will personally make sure he is safe, and I will find David, even if I have to turn Denver upside down. You have my number now. I will keep in constant contact. Mr. Robert, why are you doing this? Why is an airplane commander caring so much about my son? Because 6 years ago I said terrible things to the man who was my best friend. I said he was irresponsible, a liar, that he was worthless. And he carried those words, let them destroy him from the inside. Part of the reason why Ethan is without a father, why you are working 3 jobs, why this family is suffering, is because of me. And I need to fix that. Sarah started crying on the other end of the line. They were tears of relief, of hope, of accumulated emotional exhaustion. Thank you, was all she could say. After hanging up, Robert went to the room where Ethan was waiting. The boy was sitting in an armchair too big for him, hugging his worn-out backpack, his eyes heavy with sleep but still awake. When he saw Robert enter, he immediately straightened up. "Sir, can I go now? I need to look for my father." "Yes, you can go, but not alone. I will take you." Ethan's eyes widened. But you don't have to do this. You've already been so kind to me." "Ethan, I need to tell you something. Remember when you talked about the air transport company your father had? About his partner?" "I remember. I was that partner. Your father and I were friends, very good friends, and 6 years ago we had a big fight. I said things to him that I shouldn't have said, things that hurt deeply. And that fight was part of the reason why your family went through so many hardships." Ethan stared at Robert, processing that information. His eyebrows furrowed as he thought, and Robert could see the intelligence working behind those childlike eyes. "So, you really know my father? You know what he's like?" "Yes, I do. He is, or at least was, one of the most honest men I've ever known. Hard-working, dedicated, a dreamer. He had this quiet way about him, but when he smiled, it was like the sun coming out after the rain. He liked airplanes, fixing things with his own hands, making plans for the future. My mother says I'm like him, that I have the same way of being quiet and thinking. I'm sure you're like him in the best ways." Robert picked up Ethan's backpack and put it on his back. It was surprisingly light, probably containing only a few changes of clothes, the napkins with food the boy had saved, and maybe some personal items. That was all the luggage Ethan had brought for a journey that could change his life. They left the airport and Robert hailed a taxi. He gave the address that was in David's letter, and they set off for a neighborhood on the outskirts of Denver. During the approximately 40-minute ride, Ethan kept looking out the window, observing the city he didn't know. It was night, but the lights still revealed an urban world different from what he was used to in Chicago. "Mr. Robert," Ethan said suddenly, "if you and my father fought, why did he never tell me about you? Why did my mom never tell me? Sometimes when things hurt too much, we'd rather not talk about them. Your father probably wanted to protect you from bad things, and your mother must have respected that decision of his. But now you're helping me. Does that mean you two can be friends again?" "I hope so, Ethan. I really hope so." The taxi stopped in front of a modest housing complex. The buildings were 4 stories tall, with peeling paint, and some windows with makeshift curtains. It was the kind of place where people lived who struggled day after day to survive. where every end of the month was a complicated math between what they earned and what they spent. Robert paid the taxi driver and held Ethan's hand as they looked for the right apartment. It was 204, on the second floor of one of the blocks in the back. They climbed the external stairs, the concrete steps worn down by time and constant use. There were clothes hanging on makeshift clotheslines on the balconies, the smell of food coming from various directions, the sound of televisions and conversations through the thin walls. When they reached the door of apartment 204, Robert hesitated. What if David was no longer there? What if he had moved, disappeared, gone somewhere else? What if he found David in a situation even worse than he imagined? But then he felt Ethan's small hand squeeze his, and he realized he couldn't turn back anymore. He knocked on the door. They waited. Nothing. He knocked again, harder this time. They heard shuffling steps on the other side, a chain being pulled. The door opened just a crack, and through it, a face appeared. Robert needed a second to recognize him because the man in front of him had changed so much that he looked like an aged and worn-out version of the friend he had known. David Johnson was thinner, his hair grayer than it should be at 41, with unshaven stubble and deep, dark circles marking his face. He wore a worn-out t-shirt and old sweatpants, but it was the eyes that shocked Robert the most. Those eyes that were once full of dreams now seemed dull, resigned, as if they had seen too much and hoped for too little. David looked first at Robert, the recognition taking a few seconds to come. When it did, his eyes widened, and he instinctively stepped back, as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Robert?" His voice came out hoarse, disbelieving. "Hi, David. It's been a while. What are you doing here? How did you find me?" It was then that David looked down and saw the child standing next to Robert. His eyes scanned the boy's face, and something in them changed. The recognition was instant and devastating. David's legs seemed to give way, and he leaned against the doorframe. "Ethan?" It was just a whisper. "My God! Ethan?" "Hi, Dad," said the boy, his voice trembling with contained emotion. David slid to the floor, still holding onto the doorframe, tears streaming freely down his face. His hands were shaking, his whole body was shaking. He reached his arms out toward his son, but seemed afraid to touch him, as if the child were an apparition that might disappear at any moment. Ethan didn't wait any longer. He ran to his father and threw himself into his arms. David grabbed him with desperate strength, hugging the son he hadn't seen in 5 years, sobbing loudly without any attempt to hold back the emotion. The boy was crying too, his small hands clutching his father's worn-out t-shirt. "You've grown so much," David managed to say between sobs. "You're so big, so handsome. My son. My son." Robert stood by, watching that reunion, his own tears blurring his vision. That scene was worth more than 1,000 words of apologies, more than any explanation he could give. A father and a son, separated by years of pain, pride, and difficult circumstances, finally together again. David finally looked up at Robert, still holding Ethan against his chest. How did he get here? What happened?" "He traveled alone, eating leftover food on the plane because he had no money. Looking for you because his mother is sick and he thought you could help." David's face twisted in pure anguish. "Sarah is sick. What's wrong with her?" "She's working too much. 3 jobs, David. She's working herself to death raising your son alone." David closed his eyes, fresh tears streaming down. "I know. I always knew. I received her letters for a long time. Each one was like a knife to the chest. She begged for help, told me about the difficulties, and I couldn't do anything. I had no money to send. I barely had enough for myself. The shame was so great that I eventually stopped opening the letters. I stopped responding. I preferred to die a little inside every day than admit complete failure." "You idiot," said Robert, but without anger in his voice. "Did you really think Sarah cared about money? That your son cared if you were failing? They just wanted you around. They just wanted your presence, your love, your existence in their lives." David shook his head, hugging Ethan even tighter. "I was so afraid of coming back as a failure, of looking into my son's eyes and seeing disappointment, of not being able to give them anything but more worry. And while you were here drowning in this ridiculous pride, Robert continued, your son grew up without a father. Your wife destroyed her own health, and you lost 5 years that you'll never get back. I know, David shouted, his voice breaking. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I don't hate myself every day for being so cowardly, for letting pride be more important than my family? Ethan lifted his head from his father's chest and looked at him with those big, honest eyes. Dad, I don't care if you're rich or poor. I don't care if you have a good job or a bad one. I just wanted to have a father. I just wanted you to come home. David hugged his son again, his body shaking with deep sobs. Robert entered the apartment, closing the door to give the scene some privacy. The place was small, clean, but almost empty. There was an old sofa, a table with 2 chairs, a small old television. The walls were bare, without any decoration. It was the home of someone who was just surviving, not living. After a few minutes, David calmed down enough to stand up, still holding Ethan's hand as if afraid of losing him again. He looked at Robert, and there was so much to say that words seemed insufficient. Robert, about what happened 6 years ago. I know, Robert interrupted. The money you said you had but didn't. It was used for the family, right? For Sarah and Ethan. David nodded. Sarah was pregnant when we made plans to expand the company. She started having pregnancy complications. She needed complete bed rest, which meant she couldn't work. I had to pay the bills alone, pay for health insurance, buy medicine. When Ethan was born, there were problems. He was in the neonatal ICU for almost a month. It was a miracle he survived. But it cost a lot of money, Robert. A lot of money I didn't have. Why didn't you tell me? Pride, fear. You were so excited about the company expansion, I thought I could figure it out, that I could replace the money in time. But I couldn't. And when you exploded, when you said all those things about me being a liar, irresponsible, something inside me broke. I was at such a low point that I believed every word. I really thought I was a complete failure. Robert sat on the old sofa, burying his face in his hands. I was an idiot. If you had told me about the situation, I would have understood. We would have figured something out. But I was so blinded by the dream of the business that I didn't realize you were going through hell. It wasn't just your fault. It was mine too for not having the courage to speak the truth. Ethan, who had been silently listening to the conversation, tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, Uncle Robert said you were best friends. He said you had a dream together. You can still have that dream, can't you? The 2 men looked at the boy and then at each other. 6 years of hurt, pride, and silence stood between them. But there were also decades of friendship, trust, and shared dreams. And there, in that small and almost empty apartment, with a child serving as a bridge between 2 worlds that had drifted apart, there was the possibility of a fresh start. David, said Robert, his voice firm but emotional, I deeply regret the things I said 6 years ago. You're not irresponsible. You're a man who made difficult choices in impossible situations, and I should have been friend enough to understand that. And I'm sorry for not trusting you, replied David, for letting pride blind me, for throwing away our friendship out of pure fear of admitting I needed help. Then let's fix this, here and now. No more pride, no more silence. Let's talk like grown men and figure out how we're going to clean up the mess we made. David nodded, wiping tears from his face. He pulled Ethan onto his lap, and for the first time in years, there was a different glimmer in his eyes. Hope, perhaps, or simply the feeling that he was no longer alone carrying the weight of the world. They talked for hours. David told him about the years since the company closed. He tried various jobs in Chicago, but depression and lack of confidence got him fired or simply unable to hold on. Eventually, he decided to try his luck in another city, thinking a complete fresh start might help. In Denver, he got temporary jobs here and there: stocker at a supermarket, helper at a mechanic's shop, street vendor. Never anything that lasted long or paid enough. He lived in a rented room shared with 3 other people, then managed to get this small apartment where he lived alone, paying low rent for a place that had just the basics: He sent money to Sarah when he could, but they were small and irregular amounts. Every letter from her was a painful reminder that he had a family depending on him, and he was failing. Eventually, the shame grew so great that he stopped replying. He thought it would be better for everyone if he just disappeared for good. At least that way Sarah could move on, maybe find someone better who could take proper care of her and Ethan. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Robert listened to everything without interrupting. When David finished, he took a deep breath and began to tell his own story of the last 6 years, how his pilot career had gone well, steady progression, comfortable salary, how he married Emily, a teacher he met during a flight, how they lived comfortably, childless by choice, with growing investments and a stable, predictable life. But he also spoke about the emptiness he always felt, the absence of the dream he had shared with David, the lack of a friend who had been like a brother. Several times over the years, Robert almost called David. He even looked up his number, dialed halfway, but always hung up before completing the call. Pride again, and fear that David wouldn't want to talk, that the damage was irreparable. "But then today," said Robert, "I saw your son eating leftover food on the plane, and everything made sense. All the pieces fell into place. I realized my pride had cost much more than just a business deal. It had cost a friendship, and it had contributed to the suffering of innocent people." Ethan, who had fallen asleep on his father's lap during the conversation, woke up startled when a car honked outside. He looked around, disoriented for a moment, before remembering where he was. His eyes found his father's face, and he smiled. That smile Sarah had said was identical to David's. "Dad, can I ask you a question?" "Sure, son, anything." "Are you coming home now that we found each other?" David looked at Robert, then back at Ethan. There was so much uncertainty in his eyes, so much fear of making the wrong choice again. "Ethan," said Robert before David could answer, "your father is coming home, and I'm going to help make that happen, but it won't be tomorrow. There are things that need to be organized, conversations that need to happen. The important thing is that from today on, you're not alone looking for him anymore, and he's not alone trying to find himself. And Mom, will she be happy?" David finally smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Your mother will be very happy, and with luck, she'll forgive me for being such an idiot." "She'll forgive," said Ethan with a child's conviction. "She always says true love forgives everything." Robert stayed with David and Ethan that night. The three slept in the small apartment, Ethan on the sofa, Robert on an improvised mattress, and David in his tiny bedroom. But before they slept, Robert called Sarah. "Miss Sarah, we found David." There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sound that seemed like a held-back sob. "And Ethan, is he okay?" "He's fine. He's with his father. They reunited a few hours ago. It was intense, very emotional." "And David, how is he?" Robert looked to where David was sitting with Ethan, the two talking quietly about something the boy had learned in school. "He's surviving. He's not in an easy situation, Sarah. But there's something you need to know. David never abandoned you because he didn't care. He left because he cared too much and couldn't accept that he couldn't provide for you the way he thought he should." "I know." Sarah's voice was soft, tired but understanding. "I always knew. David was always like that. He put the weight of the world on his shoulders and thought he had to carry it alone. I tried to make him understand that I just wanted him around, but his pride was stronger. You two are made for each other, stubborn to the last hair." Sarah gave a weak laugh. "Maybe. Mr. Robert, can you do something for me? Anything. Can you ask David to call me? No matter what time it is. I just want to hear his voice." Robert handed the phone to David. The man took it with trembling hands, looked at the screen as if it were an alien artifact, and finally put it to his ear. "Sarah?" Robert walked away to give them privacy, taking Ethan out of the room. They sat on the small balcony, looking at the city lights. The boy swung his legs in the air, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Uncle Robert, can I ask you something serious?" "Of course you can." Why do adults complicate things so much? Why is it so hard to just talk? Ask for help. Say you're scared or that you need someone. Robert smiled sadly. That was too deep a question for an 8-year-old, but Ethan wasn't an ordinary child. Life had forced him to mature too quickly. You know, Ethan, when we grow up, we learn a lot of things, but we also learn wrong things. He learns that asking for help is a sign of weakness, that crying is for weak people, that we have to handle everything alone or we're no good. And these lies pile up in our heads until we truly believe them. But that's nonsense, right? My teacher says everyone needs help sometimes, that it's okay to admit when we don't know something or can't do it alone. Your teacher is very wise, and so are you. Wiser than many adults out there, including your father and me. Are you really going to be friends again? We're going to make it work this time, because now we know the price of letting pride speak louder, and it's too high a price to pay. They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of the urban night. From inside the apartment they could hear David talking on the phone, his voice sometimes rising with emotion, other times almost a whisper. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. When David finally hung up and came out to the balcony, his eyes were red, but there was a lightness in his face that hadn't been there before. "How is she?" asked Robert. "Better than I deserved. She said she forgives me. Said she just wants me to come back. Doesn't care if I don't have money or a stable job. Just wants the family together again. And you, do you want to go back?" "More than anything in the world. But I'm afraid, Robert. Afraid of failing again. Of not being able to be the father and husband they deserve." Robert stood up and put his hand on his friend's shoulder. "Nobody's asking you to be perfect. They're just asking you to be present. And I'm going to help you with that. We'll rebuild together, like it should have been from the beginning." The following days were a succession of conversations, plans, and small decisions that together formed a path back. Robert used his days off and his contacts to help David. First, he got him a job in maintenance at an air taxi company in Denver. It wasn't anything grand, but it was stable, with a signed contract and a decent salary. David protested at first, saying he didn't want charity, that he needed to earn things on his own merit. Robert interrupted him firmly. "This isn't charity, it's a referral. The rest is up to you. If you don't do well at the job, they'll fire you and I won't interfere. But you're good at what you do. I remember. You have a way with engines, with mechanical systems. It's just an opportunity, David. What you do with it depends only on you." Ethan stayed in Denver with his father for a few days. Robert needed to return to Chicago to work, but kept in daily contact. He called every night to check in, listening to Ethan excitedly talk about the things he was doing with his father. David took the boy to see the new workplace, introduced him to his colleagues with evident pride in his voice. They went to a park, ate hot dogs from a street vendor, talked about everything and nothing at the same time. They were simple moments, but vital. They were the 5 lost years trying to be recovered in a few intense days. Father and son learning to know each other again, or in David's case, getting to know for the first time who his son really was. When it was time for Ethan to return to Chicago, the airport was the scene of more tears. But they were different tears from the first ones. They weren't of despair or loss, but of hope and sincere promises. David hugged his son tightly, whispering promises he intended to keep this time. "I'll be back soon, son. I just need to organize some things here. Save up some money and I'll come back, I promise. And this time it's a promise I'm going to keep." "I know, Dad. And if it takes too long, I'll come get you again. Only next time I'll give you a heads up." David gave a tearful laugh. "Please do. My heart can't take another scare like that." Robert took Ethan back to Chicago. During the flight, the boy didn't sleep. He stayed awake, looking out the window, processing everything that had happened in the last few days. In the last hour of the flight, he turned to Robert. "Uncle Robert, thank you for everything, for helping me find my father, for helping my father find himself too." "You don't need to thank me, Ethan. Actually, I should be the one thanking you." "Thanking me? Why?" "Because you reminded me of what really matters in life, the value of family, friendship, forgiveness. You're 8 years old and wiser than I am at 45. That's something special." When they landed at Midway, Sarah was waiting. Robert recognized her immediately from David's description. A woman around 35 years old, too thin, with dark circles that showed the weariness of years of struggle, but with eyes that shone upon seeing her son running toward her. The hug between mother and son was intense. Sarah checked Ethan from head to toe, looking for any sign of trouble, asking if he had eaten well, if he had slept, if he had behaved. Ethan answered all the questions patiently, but his eyes were shining with something more important to tell. "Mom, I found my father, and he's okay, and he's coming back home. For real this time." Sarah looked at Robert over her son's head. Her eyes were misty. "Is it true?" "It's true. David is getting organized. He has a job now, is saving money. In a few months he'll be back, and this time, to stay." "Mr. Robert." Sarah approached him, still holding Ethan's hand. "I have no words to thank you for what you've done for my family. You brought my son back safely, and brought hope back into our lives." "Miss Sarah, I just tried to fix a mistake that should have been avoided years ago. And about your situation, Ethan told me that you're working too much, that your health is suffering." Sarah lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "I do what I need to do to take care of my son." "I understand, and I admire you for that. But I have a proposal. The airline where I work is looking for people for the night cleaning crew at the airport. It's one job, just one, but it pays well and has all the benefits. If you're interested, I can make the referral. One job, with benefits. Signed contract, health insurance, meal vouchers, everything proper. It won't be easy, it's night work and quite physically demanding, but it's better than 3 jobs with no security at all. And with the health insurance, you can get a full checkup, see if everything's okay with your health." Sarah covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ethan hugged his mother, and Robert saw there the strength that kept that family together. The unconditional love of a child for his mother, of a mother for her son. It was something pure, true, that transcended all material difficulties. In the following weeks, Robert worked to make the changes he had promised happen. Sarah got the job at the airline and was finally able to quit her other 2 jobs. She had full medical exams and found out she had early-stage anemia and hypertension, consequences of extreme stress and poor nutrition. With proper treatment and a more sustainable work pace, her health began to gradually improve. In Denver, David dedicated himself to his new job with an intensity that impressed his colleagues. He arrived early, left late, was always willing to learn new things or help with extra tasks. He saved every penny he could, sending most of his salary to Sarah and keeping the rest for the move back to Chicago. At night, before sleeping, David would call home. She was talking with Ethan about the boys' day at school, about his friends, about plans for when he returned. She was talking with Sarah about the hopes and fears they both shared. These were conversations that healed old wounds, that rebuilt the foundation of trust that had been broken. Robert also became part of the family's routine. He visited Sarah and Ethan regularly, took the boy to see airplanes, told stories about the places he had flown. Gradually, without anyone planning it, he became a sort of honorary uncle, someone the family could count on in times of need. Emily, Robert's wife, was initially surprised by her husband's deep involvement with that family. But after meeting Ethan and hearing the full story, she also grew fond of the boy and his mother. She began tutoring Ethan for free, using her skills as a teacher to help the boy excel even more in his studies. 3 months after that fateful flight, David finally returned to Chicago. He had saved enough money for a small rented apartment, nothing too big or luxurious, but it was theirs. It had basic furniture, simple curtains, but each piece had been chosen with care and love. The day of the family reunion was emotional. Ethan couldn't sit still the entire day at school, counting the minutes until he could go home and see his father. When David knocked on the door of the apartment where Sarah and Ethan were temporarily living, it was as if the world stopped for a moment. Sarah opened the door and stood still, just looking at the man she had loved since she was young, who had gotten lost along the way, but was now back. David was different. He had gained a few pounds. His face was no longer so marked by hopelessness. His eyes had regained some of that sparkle she remembered from when they were young. "Hi, Sarah," said David, his voice choked up. "I'm back. To stay this time." Sarah didn't say anything. She simply threw herself into his arms and cried. They were tears of relief, of forgiveness, of love that had never truly died, but had been buried under layers of pain and difficult circumstances. David hugged her back, burying his face in her hair, whispering apologies and promises and words of love that had been stuck for years. Ethan watched from a distance for a moment, a huge smile on his face. Then he ran and joined the hug, and the three stood there at the apartment door, forming a family unit that had been broken but was now being rebuilt, piece by piece, hug by hug. Robert and Emily watched from afar, keeping a respectful distance, but ready to join when called. And they were soon after. Ethan ran to them, took both their hands and practically dragged them into the apartment. "You're part of the family now too," the boy declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. "It's not just Dad, Mum and me anymore. It's all of us together." And so a new phase began. David managed to transfer his job from Denver to Chicago, now working for the same air taxi company, but at the Midway base. This meant he could be close to his family every day, come home every night, be consistently present in Ethan's life. Sarah continued her job at Robert's airline, her health improving every month. She and David lived separately for the first few months, each processing the years of separation, learning again how to be with each other. But gradually, naturally, they rebuilt the relationship. Dinners together became routine, walks in the park on Sundays, conversations that lasted for hours about everything and nothing. Ethan flourished in this rebuilt environment. His grades at school improved even further. He signed up for a science club, feeding his natural curiosity. He constantly talked about wanting to be a pilot when he grew up, like his Uncle Robert, or maybe an aeronautical engineer to help fix planes like his father. The world was open to him in ways it hadn't been before. Robert and David, in turn, actively worked to rebuild the friendship that had been so important to both of them. It wasn't easy at first. There were unresolved resentments, hurts that needed to be expressed and worked through. But they committed to the process. Difficult conversations were had, sincere apologies were exchanged, and gradually, trust was rebuilt. It wasn't the same friendship as before. It was different, more mature, tempered by the experience of loss and reunion. But in many ways it was stronger, because now they both knew the value of what they had. They knew what it meant to lose a friend, a brother, to pride and misunderstandings, and they were determined not to let that happen again. 1 year after that flight where Robert found Ethan eating leftover food, life had transformed for everyone involved. The Johnson family was reunited in a modest but cozy apartment. David and Sarah had remarried, a simple but moving ceremony at the courthouse with Ethan as the proud witness. Robert and Emily were constant presences in their lives, a chosen family that had become as important as their blood family. Ethan had gained not just his father back, but also 2 uncles who loved him and invested in his future. On a rainy winter Sunday, the 3 men from the story were sitting in the living room of the Johnsons' apartment. Ethan, now 9 years old, was doing homework at the kitchen table. David was fixing a broken blender while Robert drank coffee. "You know what's funny?" Robert said suddenly. "A year ago, if someone told me my life would completely change because of a boy eating leftover food on a plane, I wouldn't have believed it." David looked at him and smiled. Sometimes God uses the most unlikely situations to put us back on the right path. "You believe in God now?" "You were always kind of skeptical about that stuff." "I don't know if I believe in God in the traditional sense, but I believe there's something bigger than us, something that conspires for the right things to happen at the right time. I needed to hit rock bottom to find the strength to climb up, and you needed to see my son in a situation of need to realize what really matters in life." "You're getting old and philosophical," Ethan joked from the kitchen, making both men laugh. "Respect your elders, kid," David replied, but he was smiling. Sarah entered the room carrying a tray with more coffee and some cookies she had made that morning. She sat next to David, resting her head on his shoulder, and for a moment everyone was in a comfortable silence. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find out this was all a dream," Sarah said quietly. that I'll be back in that tiny little room, working 3 jobs, not knowing how I'll pay the month's bills. David kissed the top of her head. It's not a dream, it's real, and we'll make it work. Together. Robert watched the scene with deep satisfaction. A year ago, he was living on autopilot, his life comfortable but without real purpose. Now he felt he was part of something bigger, that his choices mattered, that his actions had real consequences in people's lives. But the journey was far from over. There were still challenges ahead, difficult decisions to be made, complicated situations to be navigated. Life hadn't suddenly become perfect. There were still bills to pay, worries about the future, moments of uncertainty. But now they faced all of this together, and that made all the difference. A few months after the complete reunion of the Johnson family, Robert was approached by David with an unusual proposal. They were having coffee after work at a diner near the airport when David pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket. "Robert, I've been thinking about something for months. I didn't have the courage to speak before because I thought you'd laugh in my face." "Speak about what?" David took a deep breath. "I want to try again. The company, our dream of having our own air charter operation." Robert stopped with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "David, I know, last time everything went wrong, I messed it all up. But I've learned a lot over these years, about business, about communication, about not letting pride blind me, and more importantly, I've learned about asking for help when I need it. Do you have money to invest?" "I have some savings. Not much, but it's a start. And this time I won't lie about how much I have or fail to say where I'm using the money. Total transparency. If you agree, of course." Robert remained silent for a long moment. Part of him wanted to say no, that it was too risky, that they had just rebuilt their lives and shouldn't risk everything again. But another part, the one that had dreamed together with David so many years ago, was pulsing with enthusiasm. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "But I'll be honest, David, the idea appeals to me. I just need to assess if it makes financial sense, and if Emily will support it." David nodded, visibly relieved. "That's all I ask, that you consider it. No pressure, no absurd expectations, just consider it." Robert spoke with Emily that night. His wife listened to everything, asked relevant questions about investment, risks, business plans. In the end, she surprised Robert. "You should do it," she said. "Really? I thought you'd think I was crazy." "You've always wanted this, Robert. I know. You're happy flying commercially, but you've never been completely fulfilled. There was always something missing. And now, with David back, with the friendship rebuilt, maybe it's the right time to try again. But what if it goes wrong? What if we lose money? What if the friendship doesn't survive another failed attempt?" Emily held her husband's face with both hands. "What if it works? What if you can build something amazing together? What if this is the opportunity you needed to prove to yourselves that you were capable?" That's how 2 months later, Robert and David were sitting in a lawyer's office, signing the papers for a new company. It wasn't as grand as the original idea from years ago. It was modest, conservative, realistic. They would start with a single small plane, local operations, small but reliable clients. They would grow gradually, without rushing, without going into unreasonable debt. Ethan was present at the signing of the documents. When asked why he had brought his son, David simply replied, "Because he's part of this. He's the one who brought us back together. It's only fair that he sees the next chapter of the story." The boy watched everything with serious attention, asking smart questions about the business. Robert answered each one with respect, treating Ethan like an informal junior partner. "When I grow up," said Ethan, "I'm going to fly planes for your company, and I'll be the best pilot the company has ever had." "I don't doubt it at all," replied Robert, ruffling the boy's hair. "You have determination and courage. You'll go far, Ethan." The first months of the company were challenging. Getting clients wasn't easy. The competition was fierce, and they were newcomers trying to establish themselves in a competitive market. There were weeks when they didn't have a single flight booked. There were moments of doubt where both wondered if they hadn't made a mistake trying again. But there was something different this time. When things got tough, they talked. They didn't keep worries to themselves, they shared fears, uncertainties, plans to overcome obstacles. They truly worked as a team, each compensating for the other's weaknesses, celebrating successes together. Sarah also got involved in the business, offering help with administrative tasks in her spare time. Emily contributed with her organizational skills and attention to detail. Even Ethan helped, distributing company flyers at school, telling everyone about his father and uncle's company. 6 months after starting operations, they landed a larger contract. A legal documents company needed regular urgent transport between cities. It was the kind of stable client they needed. The contract was signed, and suddenly the company had predictable cash flow. With this first success, others followed. Small contracts here and there, each contributing to gradual but steady growth. By the end of the first year, they were operating in the black with small but consistent profit. They began planning to purchase a second plane for the following year, but more important than financial success was the satisfaction of building something together. The dream that had been interrupted years ago was finally coming true, and this time with more solid foundations. It wasn't perfect, there were constant problems and challenges, but they faced everything together. Ethan grew up seeing this example. He saw his father coming home tired but satisfied. He saw the two friends working side by side, not hiding difficulties but also celebrating victories. He learned about partnership, about trust, about the importance of having people by your side you can count on. Robert's life had also transformed in ways he hadn't predicted. He continued flying commercially, now part-time, dedicating the remaining time to the charter company. Emily had become close friends with Sarah, the two women supporting each other while their husbands pursued a shared dream. 2 years after that fateful flight where it all began, Robert was preparing for another night flight. This time, however, it was different. Ethan was with him, participating in a special airline program that allowed children interested in aviation to spend a day observing pilots' work. The boy, now 10 years old, was radiant with excitement. He wore a special uniform, smaller but identical to Robert's, and had a clipboard where he noted everything he saw and learned. "Uncle Robert, do you think I'll ever fly a real plane?" "I don't think so, I'm sure. You'll be an amazing pilot, Ethan. Maybe even better than me." "I won't be better than you, I'll be just as good, because you taught me it's not about being better than others, but about being the best version of yourself." Robert felt a lump in his throat. That boy he'd found eating scraps 2 years ago was now quoting life lessons with the wisdom of someone much older. During the flight, Robert let Ethan observe all procedures. He explained every instrument, every decision, every safety protocol. The boy absorbed everything like a sponge, asking smart questions that sometimes even surprised Robert. Mid-flight, while the autopilot was engaged and they were peacefully crossing the American night, Ethan looked out the window at the city lights below. "Uncle Robert, can I ask you a personal question?" "Always." "Do you regret anything in your life?" Robert thought for a moment before answering. "I regret letting pride blind me years ago. I regret saying horrible things to your father. About having lost 6 years that I could have spent being his friend. But you know what I learned about regrets?" "What?" "That they're only worth something if we do something to fix what was broken. If we just keep dwelling on the past without acting in the present, regret is useless. But if we use it as motivation to do better, to fix mistakes, then it becomes something positive. Is that why you helped us? To fix the regret?" "I started helping for that reason. But I kept helping because I came to love you all. You, your dad, your mum. You became my family too." Ethan smiled and went back to taking notes on his clipboard, but Robert saw the boy discreetly wipe a tear from the corner of his eye. When they landed, it was already early morning. David was waiting at the airport to pick up Ethan. When he saw his son coming off the aircraft wearing that uniform, with that huge smile on his face, and with pages and pages of aviation notes, his eyes shone with pride. "So, son, how was it?" "It was amazing, Dad. I learned about hydraulic systems, about navigation, about meteorology. Did you know pilots have to interpret not just maps, but also wind patterns and—" David and Robert exchanged a look, while Ethan spoke excitedly. gesturing with his hands, his eyes shining with passion. It was the look of two men who had seen a child's potential developing, who had been part of nurturing that potential, and who knew they were witnessing the beginning of something special. In the months that followed, life continued its pace. The charter company had its first anniversary and was planning expansion for the second aircraft. Sarah had received a promotion at work, now supervising a cleaning team. David and she had finally managed to buy a small apartment, nothing luxurious but theirs, achieved through honest work and disciplined saving. Emily had started giving Ethan private lessons, preparing him to try for a scholarship at a technical school focused on aviation. The boy studied with impressive determination, maintaining high grades while devouring every book on aviation he could find. Robert watched all this with a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't the fulfillment of having built a successful career or accumulated material possessions. It was the fulfillment of having made a real difference in people's lives, of having been part of rebuilding a family, renewing a friendship, nurturing a child's dream. But not everything was roses. There were difficult moments too. The company faced a 3-month period without securing new contracts, and they had to make tough choices about where to cut costs. David had a period of emotional relapse when old demons of inadequacy came back to haunt him. Sarah had a health scare when she fainted at work from exhaustion. Each crisis, however, was faced together. When the company was struggling, Robert and David sat down and discussed every option, every possibility, hiding nothing from each other. When David struggled with his mental health, Robert was there to talk, to remind him that seeking professional help wasn't weakness. When Sarah got sick, Emily and Robert took turns helping with Ethan, while David cared for his wife. That's what family did. It wasn't about being present only in happy moments, but especially in difficult ones. It was about having someone to call at 3 in the morning when the world seemed to be falling apart. It was about knowing that no matter what, there were people who would be by your side. Ethan absorbed all these lessons quietly. He saw his mother being cared for when she was sick. He saw his father asking for help when he needed it. He saw Uncle Robert and Aunt Emily showing up without being called because they knew they were needed. And he internalized that this was what a true family meant. 3 years after that initial flight, the whole family was gathered for a special celebration. Ethan had won the scholarship to the Technical Aviation School. It wasn't easy. The competition was fierce, but his academic performance and his evident passion for aviation had impressed the evaluators. The celebration was simple, a barbecue in the small Johnson family apartment. But it was filled with genuine love and joy. Robert was in charge of the grill, making bad jokes about undercooked meat. Emily helped Sarah in the kitchen, the two talking and laughing like sisters. David was teaching Ethan some small engine maintenance tricks using a broken fan they had found. In the middle of the party, David asked for everyone's attention. He held an envelope in his hand, nervous in a way Robert rarely saw him. "I want to make a toast," David began. 3 years ago, I was in the darkest place of my life. I had lost everything that mattered. My family, my best friend, my sense of purpose. I was living like a ghost, just existing without truly living. He paused, emotional. Then my son, this amazing boy here, decided it was time to change things. At 8 years old, he had more courage than I had in my entire adult life. He traveled alone, found me, and reminded me of what really matters. And with him came Robert, the brother I chose in life, offering me something I didn't think I deserved, a second chance. David opened the envelope and pulled out a document. "This here is our company's expansion contract. We got approval to buy not 1, but 2 new planes. And more, we secured a long-term contract with a major logistics company. Officially, we are a real growing business." Applause and shouts of joy filled the apartment. But David raised his hand, asking for silence. "But this," he pointed to the document, "is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that we built this together, the right way, with honesty and communication. The most important thing is that my family is complete again. The most important thing is seeing my son happy, my wife healthy, and my best friend by my side again." Robert approached and hugged David. No words were needed. The hug said everything that needed to be said. Forgiveness, gratitude, brotherhood, love. "Dad," called Ethan, breaking the emotional moment. "Does this mean we'll be able to buy a new television? Ours is so old that sometimes the picture turns green." Everyone laughed, the emotional tension dissolving into genuine joy. David ruffled his son's hair. "It means we can think about the possibility of eventually considering starting to save, to maybe buy a new television." "That's a fancy no, right? It's a not yet, but we'll get there, son." The party continued late into the night. Neighbors were invited to join because that family's joy was too great to be contained within four walls. There was music, food, stories being told and retold, plans being made for the future. When everyone had finally left and the Johnson family was alone in their apartment, Sarah sat on the old couch hugging her husband, while Ethan slept in the bedroom, exhausted but happy. "David, are you happy? Truly?" "Truly," he replied, squeezing her hand. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to do, being who I'm supposed to be. No more urge to run away, to escape when things get tough? No, because I learned that staying and facing it is much braver than running away. And because I know I'm not alone. I have you. I have Ethan. I have Robert and Emily. I have a real family." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, and they stayed there in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the city through the open window, feeling the cool night breeze, simply existing in the present moment, with gratitude for everything they had achieved. The years kept passing. Ethan was growing up, his talent for aviation becoming more and more evident. By 14, he was taking advanced physics and math courses, already planning his path to become a pilot. His room was filled with model airplanes he built himself, posters of famous aircraft and books about the history of aviation. The charter company of Robert and David was thriving. What had started as a modest dream had turned into a respectable business. They had 5 planes now, a team of 10 employees, and contracts with several important companies. But they never lost the essence of what brought them together: mutual respect, honest communication, and the commitment to do things the right way. Sarah had also flourished. The exhausted woman with 3 jobs had transformed into a confident and respected supervisor. She had completed a technical course in administration, paid for by the airline itself as an incentive for employee development. She dreamed of one day maybe opening her own small business, something modest but hers. Emily continued teaching, but had also become more involved with Robert and David's company, handling the human resources and training part. Her natural ability to deal with people and organize processes had been essential for the structured growth of the business. But all these material and professional achievements were secondary to what really mattered: the family they had built. Not a perfect family, free of problems, but a real family, where imperfect people loved each other anyway, supported each other in difficult times, and celebrated every victory together, no matter how small. One Sunday afternoon, 4 years after that initial flight, Robert was in the company hangar, doing preventive maintenance on one of the planes. It was work he didn't need to do, they had mechanics for that, but he liked to keep his hands busy, to connect with the machines he loved. Ethan appeared at the hangar door, now a 12-year-old teenager, already taller, his voice beginning to change. "Uncle Robert, can I help?" "Always, grab that toolbox over there." They worked side by side in comfortable silence for a while. Robert teaching, Ethan learning, both appreciating the simplicity of the moment. It was Ethan who broke the silence. "Uncle, do you remember that day you found me on the plane when I was eating leftover food?" "How could I forget? It was the day that changed my life." "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and you know what I realized?" "What?" "That sometimes the worst situations in our life are actually doors opening to better things. If I hadn't gone through all that, if it hadn't been so hard, maybe we would never have gotten to where we are now." Robert stopped working and looked at the boy. That was too profound an observation to come from a 12-year-old, but Ethan was never an ordinary child. Life had forced him to mature quickly, but unlike many children in similar situations, he hadn't become bitter or resentful. He had become wise and resilient. "You are absolutely right, Ethan. Suffering isn't something we seek, but when it comes, it can transform us in important ways. If you hadn't had the courage to take that trip, if I hadn't paid attention at that moment, everything could have been different. Do you think fate exists? That things happen for a reason? I don't know if I believe in fate in the traditional sense. But I believe life presents us with crucial moments, and what we do with those moments determines who we become. You had a crucial moment when you decided to look for your father. I had one when I decided not just to take you to him, but to truly get involved to help. Your father had one when he decided to accept help instead of sinking deeper into pride. Each of us could have made different choices, but we made the right ones. What if we had made the wrong choices? Then we would have to live with the consequences. But we would also have other chances. Life always gives us other chances, Ethan. The trick is to recognize them when they appear. They finished the work on the plane and left the hangar into the afternoon sun. David was arriving with Sarah, both returning from a walk in the nearby park. Emily appeared shortly after with a pie she had made. It was one of those lazy Sundays that had nothing special about them, but were special precisely because of that. They were the result of years of hard work, of difficult choices, of forgiveness and rebuilding. They all sat in the outdoor area of the hangar, on makeshift plastic chairs, eating pie and talking about nothing and everything. Robert looked around at that group of people and felt a wave of deep gratitude. Those were the people who mattered. That was the life worth living. "Everyone," David said suddenly, "I have an important announcement to make." Everyone looked at him, curious. "Sarah and I are expecting a baby." There was a moment of shocked silence before everyone started shouting and hugging simultaneously. Ethan jumped for joy, already talking about how he was going to be the best big brother in the world. Emily cried with emotion, hugging Sarah. Robert hugged David tightly. "Congratulations, brother. You deserve this." "We're nervous," David admitted. "It's already hard to raise a child. Imagine starting all over with a baby. But we're also very happy. And this time I'll be there from the beginning. I'll be the father I couldn't be for Ethan in the early years." "You're a great father," said Ethan, hugging David, "and you'll be amazing with the baby too." The news brought a new wave of hope and joy to everyone. The family that had been rebuilt was about to grow even more. And this time the baby would be born into a structured family, with present parents, with a solid support network, with abundant love around. The months of Sarah's pregnancy were filled with care and attention. David was present at every doctor's appointment, something he hadn't been able to do with Ethan. Emily organized a modest but affectionate baby shower. Robert made sure that Sarah had access to the best medical care that the airline's health plan offered. Ethan was excited about the prospect of being a big brother. He read books about child development, constantly asked questions about how to help care for a baby, already planning all the things he would teach his brother or sister when they grew up. When Sophie was born, a healthy baby girl with big eyes and lots of crying, it was as if a circle had been completed. David held his daughter in his arms and cried, not from sadness, but from deep joy and gratitude. This time, he was there. This time, he wouldn't miss a single moment. This time, he would do everything right. Ethan met his sister with almost religious reverence. He held the tiny baby with extreme care, whispering promises that he would always protect her, that he would always be there for her, that she would never feel alone. Robert watched everything with deep satisfaction. 5 years ago, he had found a boy eating leftover food on a plane. Now he was watching that same boy, transformed into a responsible and loving 12-year-old young man, holding his newborn sister, part of a rebuilt and thriving family. Life had come full circle. What had begun with suffering had turned into joy. What had been broken had been rebuilt, stronger than before. And what seemed lost forever had been found again when they least expected it. The years continued their course. Sophie grew up surrounded by love. Ethan was becoming increasingly impressive, his talent for aviation materializing in exceptional academic results. By 16, he was already taking preparatory courses for flight school, his goal clear and unwavering to become a pilot. Robert and David's company prospered, but never at the expense of family. They had learned that balance was essential. that there was no point in building a business empire if they lost the people they loved in the process. So they made sure to be present at Sophie's school recitals, at the soccer games Ethan started playing, at birthdays and family celebrations. Sarah had finally opened her own small business, a snack bar near the airport that served employees of the various companies in the area. It was small, but it was hers, achieved through hard work, savings, and family support. David helped in his spare time, Emily provided administrative advice, Robert used his contacts to spread the word. It was another example of how that family worked, everyone contributing to each other's success. Emily had become an essential maternal figure for Ethan and Sophie. She didn't replace Sarah, but complemented her, offering different perspectives, unconditional support and genuine love. The two women had become not just friends, but true sisters, each recognizing and valuing what the other brought to the extended family. 8 years after that fateful flight, Ethan was preparing to take the admission exam for the flight academy. He was 16 years old, in his final year of high school, and his dream was about to come true. The night before the exam, he was restless, nervous in a way he rarely showed. Robert went to visit him, finding the boy sitting on the apartment balcony, looking at the night sky, where a few stars managed to compete with the city lights. Nervous? Scared to death, admitted Ethan. What if I don't pass? What if I'm not good enough? Ethan, you're one of the smartest and most dedicated young men I know. You will pass. But even if for some reason you don't pass this time, it won't be the end of the world. You try again, keep studying, and make it next time. But I don't want to disappoint anyone. You all invested so much in me, believed in me. Robert sat down next to the boy and put a hand on his shoulder. Ethan, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. You will never disappoint us, never. Because it's not about you passing an exam or becoming a pilot. It's about who you are as a person, and you are an amazing person, kind, hard-working, smart, loyal. These qualities don't depend on passing any test. But I really want this. I want to fly. I want to feel what you feel when you're in the air. And you will feel it. I know you will. But don't let the pressure take the joy out of the process. Tomorrow, when you enter that exam room, remember why you want this. It's not to prove anything to anyone. It's because you love aviation. It's because it makes your heart beat faster. Let that love guide you, not fear. Ethan took a deep breath, absorbing the words. Thank you, Uncle Robert, for everything. For being there that day on the plane, for not just passing by me, for stopping and looking and caring. Thank you, Ethan, for reminding me of what really matters in life, for giving me the chance to fix old mistakes, for being the bridge that brought your father and me back together. The next day, Ethan took the exam. When the results came out 2 weeks later, he had passed with one of the highest scores in the class. The celebration was intense, filled with hugs, tears of joy, and plans for the bright future that lay ahead. But even amid the happiness, Robert felt a twinge of nostalgia. Ethan was growing up, becoming independent. Soon he would be at the flight academy, then working, living his own life. It was the natural cycle, but it still hurt a little to let go of that boy he had found on the plane years ago. David, noticing his friend's thoughts, sat beside him during the party. He's growing up fast, huh? Very fast. It seems like just yesterday he was a child eating leftover food. And now he's about to start the path to achieving his dream. We're lucky to have been part of his journey. You're right, and we'll continue to be part of it. Just in different ways as he grows. Ethan's life at the flight academy was as successful as everyone had hoped. He stood out among the students, not just for his intelligence, but for his genuine passion for aviation. His instructors commented on his natural talent, his ability to stay calm in stressful situations, his meticulous attention to safety details. On weekends, when he returned home, Ethan helped at Sarah's snack bar and spent time with Sophie, who was now 6 years old and a curious, talkative child. She adored her older brother and was always asking him to tell stories about planes and flights. David and Robert continued working together in the company, which had established itself as one of the most reputable charter operations in the region. They now had 10 planes, a team of 30 employees, and operations in 3 states. But they never forgot where they came from, the difficulties they faced, the lessons learned along the way. 10 years after that initial flight, the whole family was gathered for another important celebration. Ethan, now 18, had graduated from the flight academy at the top of his class. He was about to start his first job as a co-pilot at a regional airline. His dream was coming true. During the graduation speech, Ethan surprised everyone by calling Robert and David to the stage. With a choked but firm voice, he spoke to the audience about his story. About being an 8-year-old boy traveling alone to find an absent father. About eating leftover food because he had no money. About the pilot who didn't just pass by him, but stopped and looked and cared. "I wouldn't be here today," said Ethan, looking directly at Robert and David, "if it weren't for your example. You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. That family isn't just blood, but choice. That mistakes can be corrected if we have humility. And that true love survives any hardship." There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Sarah cried openly, Emily beside her holding Sophie, who didn't fully understand what was happening but knew it was important. Robert and David hugged Ethan on stage, 3 generations of dreamers united by unlikely circumstances, but unbreakable bonds. After the ceremony, the family went to dinner at a modest but cozy restaurant. During the meal, Sophie, who had been quietly observing everything, suddenly spoke. "Ethan, when I grow up, I want to be a pilot like you and Uncle Robert." Ethan smiled and ruffled his sister's hair. "You can be anything you want, Soph. Pilot, doctor, teacher, astronaut. The sky isn't the limit when you have a family that believes in you. But I want to be a pilot because it's cool, and because then I'll be close to you. And you'll be an amazing pilot," Robert assured. "In a few years, when you're ready, I'll personally teach you everything I know." The conversation continued lively, plans being made, dreams being shared. Robert observed everything with deep satisfaction. That 6-year-old child in his mother's arms, talking about wanting to fly, was living proof of how a story that began in despair and need had transformed into hope and possibility. Ethan's first day as a co-pilot was exciting and frightening at the same time. Robert made sure to be at the airport, not interfering but present, a reassuring presence. David was also there, along with Sarah and Emily. Sophie had to be at school, but she made Ethan promise to call later and tell her everything. When Ethan put on the full co-pilot uniform for the first time, with the stripes on the shoulders and the badge with his name, he seemed to have grown 10 centimeters. He was no longer the boy Robert had found eating leftover food. He was a young professional, prepared, competent, about to fulfill the dream he had pursued for a decade. "How are you feeling?" asked Robert. "Nervous, excited, scared, grateful, all at the same time." "That's normal. On my first flight as a co-pilot, I shook so much I spilled the water glass. But as soon as the plane took off, everything fell into place, and it will for you too. Will you be watching? I'll be here when you take off and when you land, as I always have been, as I always will be." Ethan hugged Robert, holding on tight, and Robert realized he was no longer hugging a child, but a man he had helped shape, together with David, Sarah, Emily, and the whole extended family they had built together. The flight was perfect. Ethan executed every procedure with precision, remained calm when there was moderate turbulence, and showed everyone that he was exactly where he should be. When he landed, his family was waiting for him with hugs, flowers, and overflowing pride. In the years that followed, Ethan built a solid career as a pilot. He progressed from co-pilot to captain, accumulated flight hours, gained experience. But he never forgot where he came from, never lost the humility that had been forged in difficult times. Sophie was also growing up and truly showed she had inherited the passion for aviation. By the age of 12, she was already taking preparatory courses, spending hours reading about flight physics and aviation history. Robert began teaching her, fulfilling the promise he had made years ago. David and Sarah watched their children with immense pride. The difficulties of the past now seemed part of another life, so distant that it was sometimes hard to believe it had really happened. But the scars were still there, hidden but present, reminding them never to take what they had for granted. Robert and Emily also reflected on how their lives had changed. They had no biological children, but they had Ethan and Sophie, who called them uncle and aunt, but were actually much more than that. They had David and Sarah, who were more than friends. They were true family. They had a life full of purpose, connection, and love. 15 years after that fateful flight, Ethan was preparing for a special mission. He had been chosen at 23 years old to be one of the youngest pilots to participate in an advanced training program for long-distance flights. It was an immense honor, recognition of his talent and dedication. The night before leaving for the program, the whole family gathered for a farewell dinner. It wasn't a sad farewell, but a celebration of another chapter in Ethan's journey. Sophie, now 13, was excited about her brother participating in something so special, but also visibly sad that he would be away for a few months. "You will come back, right?" she asked, trying to hide her emotion. "Of course I'll be back," Ethan replied, hugging his sister. "And when I come back, I'll have learned new things to teach you. Do you promise that when I'm ready to fly, you'll be with me on my first flight?" "I promise. I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world." During dinner, David stood up to make a toast. 15 years ago, I was lost, literally and figuratively. I had lost my way, my family, my best friend. I thought there was no turning back, that I had destroyed everything that mattered. But then Ethan, 8 years old, showed more courage than I had shown in my entire life. He came to get me. David paused, emotional. And Robert, my brother, my friend, offered me something I didn't think I deserved. Forgiveness, a second chance, unconditional love. Together, you two saved not just my life, but gave me a life worth living. He raised his glass. So this toast is for Ethan, who is about to fly even higher than he already does. For Robert and Emily, who are the glue that holds this family together. For Sarah, the strongest and most resilient woman I know. And for Sophie, who reminds us every day about the joy of dreaming. We are an unlikely family, built on corrected mistakes and unconditional love, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Cheers, everyone responded, glasses clinking around the table. Ethan left for the training program with a full heart and the certainty that no matter what happened, he had a family waiting for him. Not a perfect family, but a real family, with all its flaws and imperfections, but united by bonds stronger than any difficulty. The months Ethan spent in the training program were intense. He called home every week, telling about the challenges, the achievements, the moments of doubt. Robert and David took turns giving advice, sharing experiences from their own careers. Sarah offered the maternal comfort that only a mother can give. Emily sent letters with words of encouragement, and Sophie sent drawings of airplanes and messages saying she missed her brother. During this period, something unexpected happened in Robert's life. He began to feel excessive tiredness, chest pains during flights. Initially, he attributed it to age, with 48 years in a demanding profession weighing on him. But Emily insisted he see a doctor. The tests revealed a heart problem that needed immediate treatment. It wasn't fatal, but it was serious enough for the doctors to recommend he stop flying. The news was devastating. Robert had built his identity around being a pilot. It was who he was, not just what he did. The idea of never again feeling the controls of an airplane in his hands, of never again experiencing that feeling of freedom when cutting through the clouds, was almost unbearable. He tried to hide the situation from everyone, especially from Ethan, not wanting to worry the young man during his important training. But David noticed something was wrong. He had known his friend too long to be fooled. He forced a conversation, and Robert finally broke down, telling about the diagnosis and the fear he felt. "I'm a pilot, David. It's who I am. Without that, who will I be? You'll be Robert Anderson, my best friend, Emily's husband, Ethan and Sophie's uncle, partner in the company, mentor to young pilots. You are much more than your profession. But flying, it's my passion. It's what makes me feel alive. And you can stay involved with aviation in other ways. You can train pilots. You can work more on the administrative side of the company. You can write about your experiences. Robert, you're not losing everything. You're just entering a new phase." David's words helped, but the transition was difficult. Robert had to communicate his medical condition to the airline. It was one of the most difficult conversations of his life. They offered him an administrative position, recognizing his years of exemplary service, but it wasn't the same. He accepted because he needed to work, but his heart wasn't in it. Emily was his rock during this period. She didn't try to minimize the pain or force toxic positivity. She was simply present, holding his hand during difficult nights, listening when he needed to talk, offering comforting silence when words weren't enough. Sarah and David also did their best to support their friend. They invited Robert and Emily to frequent dinners, included them in all family activities, made sure he knew he had value beyond his ability to fly. When Ethan finally returned from the training program, he immediately noticed something was different about Robert. His uncle always had a special energy when talking about flying, but now there was a veiled sadness in his eyes. Ethan forced a private conversation. "Uncle Robert, what's going on? And don't tell me it's nothing, because I know you." Robert sighed. There was no hiding it from Ethan. The young man was too perceptive. "I can't fly anymore. Heart problems." The doctors were clear that it would be too risky to keep piloting. Ethan felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Robert flying was one of the constants in his life. The idea that this had ended was hard to process. "Uncle, I'm so sorry. I know how much flying means to you. It means everything, or it did. I'm still trying to figure out how to redefine myself." "You don't need to redefine yourself," said Ethan with conviction. "You just need to find new ways to express who you are. And you know what? You can keep flying through me, through Sophie, through every pilot you've trained and inspired. Every time I take off, a part of you is with me. Every lesson you taught me, every piece of advice you gave me is up in the air with me." Robert felt tears in his eyes. That boy he'd found eating scraps years ago was now offering wisdom and comfort. "Thank you, Ethan. Your words mean more than you can imagine. And there's something else," Ethan continued. "Sophie is starting to get more serious about wanting to be a pilot. She'll need a mentor, someone who can guide her. No one better than you. You can't be at the controls, but you can be there every step of her way, like you were for mine." The idea sparked something in Robert. Mentorship, teaching, passing on everything he'd learned in nearly 5 decades of aviation. Perhaps that was his new mission. In the following months, Robert dedicated himself to this new role with the same passion he had dedicated to flying. He began working more intensively with Sophie, who at 13 was increasingly determined to follow in her brother's footsteps. He created a personalized study program for her, taught flight theory, aviation history, aeronautical physics. He took her to the company hangar so she could observe the mechanics working, understand every part of an airplane. Sophie absorbed everything like a sponge. She was different from Ethan in many ways, more outgoing, more questioning, but she had the same burning passion for aviation, and having Robert as a personal mentor was a privilege she didn't take for granted. "Uncle Robert, do you think girls can be as good pilots as boys?" "Sophie, some of the best pilots I've known are women. The sky has no gender. What matters is skill, passion, and dedication, and you have all three in abundance." The girl's eyes shone with pride and renewed determination. Robert also began teaching at a technical aviation school, sharing his decades of experience with young people dreaming of flying. He discovered that teaching brought a different but equally profound satisfaction. Seeing a student's eyes light up when they finally understood a complex concept, knowing he was shaping the next generation of pilots, was rewarding in ways he hadn't anticipated. The charter company also demanded more attention. With Robert dedicating more time to the administrative side, he and David managed to expand operations even further. They hired more pilots, including some of the most talented female students Robert had mentored. The company became known not just for the quality of its service, but also for being a place that valued diversity and gave opportunities to novice pilots. 2 years after Robert's heart diagnosis, life had found a new balance. He still missed flying, probably always would, but he had found purpose in other ways of staying connected to aviation, and his health had improved with proper treatment and less physical stress. Ethan, now 25, had established himself as one of the most promising pilots of his generation. He had accumulated thousands of flight hours, received consistent praise from passengers and colleagues, and was being considered for a significant promotion. But something was bothering him. He felt like something was missing, a deeper connection to the work he was doing. It was during a family dinner that he shared this feeling. "I love flying. It's all I ever wanted to do. But sometimes I feel like I could be doing more, something more meaningful." "What do you have in mind?" asked David, curious. "I don't know exactly. Maybe working with emergency medical transport. Or maybe—" He hesitated, as if the idea was too big to put into words. "Say it, son," encouraged Sarah. "Maybe I could work with humanitarian transport, delivering medical supplies to remote areas, helping in disaster situations, using my pilot skills to really make a difference in people's lives." Robert leaned forward, genuine interest in his eyes. "That's an amazing idea, Ethan. Exactly the kind of aviation that has real meaning. But it would be a risky step. It pays less, it's more dangerous. It would require me to leave the comfortable path I'm on." "And you're afraid to take the risk," observed David, "to leave security behind to pursue something that matters more." "Yes," admitted Ethan, "and I know it's ironic considering I spent years watching you all rebuild your lives by risking things that mattered. But it's scary." "Fear is normal," said Robert. "Your grandmother was right when she said courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. The question is, if you don't try, will you regret it?" Ethan thought for a long moment. "Yes, I think I would. I think I'd always wonder what could have been." "Then you already have your answer," said Sarah, holding her son's hand. "We're proud of you regardless of the choice, but if your heart is telling you to do this, you should listen." In the following months, Ethan transitioned to working with a humanitarian transport organization. It was a radical change. The flights were to remote places, often in difficult conditions. Improvised runways, unpredictable weather, limited equipment. It was challenging in ways that commercial flying had never been, but it was also deeply rewarding. When Ethan delivered vaccines to a remote village where children were dying from preventable diseases, when he transported injured people from disaster areas to hospitals, when he brought food to communities isolated by drought, he felt he was making a real difference. Sarah worried constantly. The dangerous nature of the work kept her awake on the nights Ethan was on a mission. David tried to be strong for her, but shared the same concerns. Robert, interestingly, was the one who offered the most reassurance. "Ethan is an exceptional pilot," he assured. "I trained him personally. He knows what he's doing, and more importantly, he's doing something that matters. We have to respect his choice even when it's hard for us." Sophie, now 15, was more inspired than ever by the path her brother was taking. She also started talking about wanting to use aviation to help people. Robert nurtured this passion, showing her there were many ways to make a difference through aviation. The girl was preparing intensely for the admission exams to the Aviation Academy. She studied for hours every day, balancing regular school with the special program Robert had created for her. Her room was an aviation sanctuary, walls covered with airplane posters, models she built herself, books stacked about every aspect of flying. One night, a few months before the exams, Sophie had a moment of doubt. She found Robert in the company hangar where he often spent time, overseeing maintenance and chatting with mechanics. "Uncle Robert, can I talk to you?" "Always, Soph. What's going on?" "I'm scared. What if I'm not good enough? What if I pass the exams but discover I wasn't born to be a pilot? Ethan is so good, it seems so natural for him. What if I don't have the same talent?" Robert sat beside her on a workbench. "Soph, you know what I've discovered in almost 5 decades involved with aviation. That natural talent is good, but it's not everything. You know what really makes someone become a great pilot? Passion, discipline, the ability to learn from mistakes, humility to admit when you don't know something, and you have all those qualities. But what if I fail? Then you learn and try again. Failing isn't the end of the world, Soph. It's part of the learning process. I've failed countless times throughout my career. Your father failed, Ethan failed, everyone fails. What defines us isn't whether we fail, but how we respond to failure." Do you really think I can do this? I don't think. I'm sure. You're going to be an amazing pilot, Sophie. Different from Ethan, with your own style, your own strengths, but amazing in your unique way. Sophie hugged Robert tightly, and he realized how much that girl had grown. She was no longer the little child he had met. She was turning into a determined and capable young woman. The months passed in intense preparation. Sophie lived and breathed aviation. Sarah sometimes worried that her daughter was pushing herself too hard, but David argued that this was her passion, and passion sometimes required extreme dedication. When exam day arrived, the whole family was nervous. Robert accompanied Sophie to the test site, offering final words of encouragement before she went in. Remember what we talked about. You're prepared. You're capable. And regardless of the outcome, we're proud of you. Sophie nodded and entered, her steps firm despite the nervousness Robert knew she felt. The hours waiting for the results were agony for everyone. Sarah tried to distract herself by working at the snack bar, but burned 2 batches of bread from lack of concentration. David reviewed the same documents 3 times, without really processing anything. Robert tried to teach, but was clearly distracted. Emily cancelled her appointments and went to the Johnson house, offering company and silent support. When the phone finally rang with the results, it was Sophie who answered. Everyone watched her face, trying to decipher the news before she spoke. For a moment that seemed eternal, her face was expressionless. Then a huge smile spread. I passed! I passed with a high score! I'm in! The house exploded in celebration. Hugs, tears, shouts of joy. Sarah held her daughter as if she would never let go. David lifted Sophie into the air like he used to when she was little. Robert and Emily joined the group hug, everyone laughing and crying at the same time. Ethan was on a mission in the Alaskan wilderness when he received the news. He sent a video message to the family, his face dusty but beaming with pride. Soph, you're amazing. I can't wait to fly by your side one day. We'll be the most powerful sibling pilot duo in the United States. Sophie's journey at the Aviation Academy began with the same intensity and passion that had characterized her preparation. She was often the first to arrive and the last to leave. She asked endless questions, never satisfied with superficial answers. She wanted to understand not just how, but why. Robert visited whenever he could, offering advice based on his vast experience. But he also took care not to smother her, allowing Sophie to develop her own style, make her own mistakes, learn her own lessons. It was during Sophie's second year at the academy that something unexpected happened. Robert and David's charter company received a buyout offer from a larger airline. The offer was substantial, financially attractive, and would ensure their employees kept their jobs with better benefits. The decision wasn't easy. That company was their dream, built with blood, sweat, and tears. It was the symbol of their rebuilt friendship, of what they could achieve together. Selling it felt like betraying everything it stood for, but they also had to be pragmatic. Robert had his health limitations. David was getting older, thinking about slowing down. The offer would ensure financial security for their families, for Sophie's educational future, for any emergency that might arise. They spent weeks discussing, weighing pros and cons, consulting lawyers and accountants. They involved Ethan and Sophie in the conversations, because that decision would affect everyone. Ethan was surprisingly pragmatic. Dad, Uncle Robert, you built something incredible. But companies aren't forever. What is forever are the lessons you learned building it, the friendship you strengthened in the process, the family you created around it. If selling makes financial sense and allows you more time for what truly matters, then sell. Sophie agreed. And you can always start something else if you want, or just enjoy yourselves. Uncle Robert can focus more on teaching. Dad can spend more time with Mom, maybe help her expand the diner. You deserve to rest a little after everything you've achieved. With the family's support, Robert and David decided to accept the offer. The sale was finalized in 6 months, with clauses ensuring the employees would be retained and the company's essence would be preserved. Financially, both families were now comfortable, not rich, but secure. The transition was emotional. On the day they signed the final papers, Robert and David stood alone in the hangar that had been the company's headquarters for so many years. Do you regret it? David asked. Selling? No. Trying? Never. This company, this journey, was more about us than about business. It was about proving to ourselves that we could make it work, that our friendship was stronger than any past failure. And we proved it. We sure did, and now what's next for us? I don't know. But for the first time in decades, I have time to figure it out. And I have you by my side for the journey, whatever it may be. The two men embraced, not with sadness, but with fulfillment. They had reached the end of one chapter, but they knew other chapters were waiting to be written. With more free time, Robert devoted himself even more intensely to teaching. Not just teaching regular classes, but creating special programs for underprivileged community youth who dreamed of flying but lacked the resources. He used part of the money from selling the company to create scholarships, to buy educational materials, to make aviation accessible to those who would never have the opportunity otherwise. David, in turn, became more involved with Sarah's diner, helping transform it from a small business into a larger operation. They opened a second location, then a third. Sarah was finally fulfilling a dream she didn't even know she had, of being a successful entrepreneur. And doing it alongside her husband, working together every day, was a blessing she never took for granted. Emily continued teaching, but also started writing a book about pedagogy, sharing insights from decades of educational experience. Robert constantly encouraged her, reading her drafts, offering feedback, being her first audience. Sophie progressed through the academy with impressive determination. She had inherited her father's analytical intelligence and her mother's practical resilience. But she had developed her own style, her own voice. She wasn't trying to be a copy of Ethan or Robert. She was discovering who she was as a pilot, what her unique strengths were, where she could make the most difference. Ethan continued his humanitarian work, flying to the most remote and needy places in the United States. He had been through dangerous situations, moments where his skill as a pilot was tested to the limit. But he always returned safely, always with stories about lives touched, differences made, hope brought to forgotten places. 18 years after that initial flight where everything began, the family was gathered for another celebration. Sophie was graduating from the Aviation Academy at the top of her class. At 19 years old, she was about to begin her career as a pilot, following in her brother's footsteps, but forging her own path. During the graduation ceremony, Sophie surprised everyone by giving an unscripted speech. She stepped away from her prepared notes and spoke from the heart. "My family is unlikely," she began, her voice clear and firm. "It started with a boy eating leftover food on a plane and a pilot who decided to stop and care. It started with past mistakes being confronted and forgiven. It started with pride being swallowed and help being accepted." She looked at the audience, her eyes meeting each family member. "My brother Ethan taught me that courage is doing the right thing even when scared. My mother taught me that strength comes from never giving up, no matter how hard it gets. My father taught me that redemption is possible, that it's never too late to fix mistakes. Uncle Robert taught me that passion and purpose are worth more than status or money, and Aunt Emily taught me that family is who we choose to love, not just who shares our blood." Tears flowed freely on every family member's face as Sophie continued, "I wouldn't be here without each one of you. And when I fly, I won't be flying alone. I'll be taking all of you with me. Every lesson, every moment of love, every sacrifice you made for me. You will be my wings." The audience erupted in applause. Robert buried his face in his hands, sobbing openly. David hugged Sarah, both crying. Emily held Robert's hand, squeezing tight. Ethan, who had managed to get time off to be present, was in the front row with his face wet with tears of pride. After the ceremony, the family went to a special restaurant to celebrate. It was the same restaurant where they had celebrated Ethan's graduation years ago. There was something poetic about it, the circle completing. During dinner, Ethan made an unexpected announcement. "I've met someone," he said, smiling shyly. Sarah almost dropped her fork. "Met someone? And you're only telling us now?" "It's recent, but it's serious. Her name is Jessica. She works as a nurse on the same humanitarian missions as me. She's amazing, dedicated, brave, and I think I'm in love. The rest of the dinner was filled with questions about Jessica, demands to meet her soon, jokes about marriage and grandchildren. Ethan took it all in good humor, clearly happy to share that part of his life with the family. "When are we going to meet her?" asked David. "Soon. She's finishing a mission in the Southwest, but she'll be back next week. I thought about bringing her over for dinner at home, if you all want, of course." "If we want?" Sarah laughed. "Son, I'm already planning the menu in my head." 2 weeks later, Jessica was formally introduced to the family. She was a woman of about 26, curly hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, expressive brown eyes, and a smile that lit up her face. There was something about her that reminded Sarah, a calm strength, a resilience that came from having seen and overcome hardships. The family welcomed her with open arms. Sarah hugged her as if she were a daughter. David talked at length with her about humanitarian work, impressed by her dedication. Sophie bombarded her with questions about what it was like to work in crisis situations. Robert and Emily treated her with the affection they reserved for anyone who made Ethan happy. During dinner, Jessica shared a bit of her story. She had grown up in a humble family in rural Tennessee. She saw a lot of illness and suffering in her community due to lack of access to proper medical care. She decided to become a nurse to make a difference and eventually specialized in emergency medicine and humanitarian work. "Ethan tells me you have an incredible family story," said Jessica at one point, "about how you met under unlikely circumstances and built a true family." "It's a long story," replied Robert. "But the short version is that none of us are perfect, we all fail at some point, but love and forgiveness can fix almost anything." "That's beautiful. My own family is complicated. So seeing a family like yours, so united despite past difficulties, is inspiring." "You will always be welcome here," said Sarah sincerely. "Anyone who loves my son and shares his values is family to us." In the following months, Jessica became a regular part of the family's life. She and Ethan flew together on missions when possible, an unlikely couple in the air and on the ground, united by a shared passion for helping those in need. Sophie began her career as a pilot for a regional airline, accumulating flight hours and experience. Robert visited her whenever she had time off, offering feedback on her experiences, listening to her frustrations, and celebrating her victories. The bond between uncle and niece was special, forged in years of mentorship but evolving into something deeper, a true friendship that transcended age difference. The life of the Johnson-Anderson family, as they jokingly referred to themselves, had found a comfortable but dynamic rhythm. It wasn't perfect. There were still occasional challenges and difficulties. David sometimes struggled with episodes of depression, remnants of the difficult years that never completely disappeared. Sarah worked less now, but still had moments where the exhaustion from the years of struggle came back to haunt her. Robert sometimes woke up in the middle of the night, missing flying with a physical intensity. But they faced everything together. When David had bad days, Robert was there, reminding him of how much he had achieved, of how much he was loved. When Sarah felt exhausted, Emily took her for a day of relaxation, forcing her to slow down. When Robert missed flying, David would take him to the hangar, where they could be near the planes, smell the fuel and oil, and connect with what they loved, even if in a different way. 20 years after that initial flight, on an ordinary Sunday, the whole family was gathered at David and Sarah's house. It was a bigger house now, bought with the success of the diners, with enough space to accommodate everyone comfortably. The garden was full of flowers that Sarah cultivated with care, a therapy she had discovered in recent years. Ethan and Jessica had just announced their engagement. Sophie had been promoted to co-pilot on international flights. Robert had received a teaching award from the Aviation Association. Sarah had just signed the contract to open her 5th diner. David had started writing a memoir about his journey. Emily had finished her book on pedagogy and found a publisher. There was so much to celebrate, so many big and small victories accumulated over the years, but what they were really celebrating deep down was something simpler and more profound. They were celebrating being together. They were celebrating having survived the difficult years. They were celebrating having found each other when they needed it most. During lunch, Robert stood up to make a toast, something he rarely did. 20 years ago, he began, his voice filled with emotion, I was on a plane doing my routine rounds. I was living on autopilot, if you'll pardon the pun. I had a good life, but it lacked depth, it lacked true purpose. And then I saw a boy eating leftover food. He looked at Ethan, who now at 28 was a man, but still had those same honest and determined eyes. That boy changed my life. Not just by giving me the chance to fix an old mistake, but by showing me what really matters. Family, love, forgiveness, courage to do the right thing even when it's hard. Robert turned to David. You were my brother before words hurt our friendship, and you are my brother again, forged in fire and rebuilt stronger. Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for letting me be part of your life again. Then he looked at Sarah. Thank you for raising an incredible son alone during the hard years. Thank you for being strong when everything told you to give up. You are one of the most impressive women I know. To Emily. Thank you for being by my side every step of this journey, for supporting my choices even when they weren't the most practical, for loving this chaotic family as much as I do. To Sophie. Thank you for giving me purpose when I thought I had lost everything. Teaching you to fly has been one of the greatest joys of my life. I can't wait to see where your wings take you. And finally, to Jessica. Welcome to the craziest and most loving family you could have chosen to join. Thank you for making Ethan happy in a way I've never seen before. Robert raised his glass, tears flowing freely. To family, to love, to second chances, to leftover food that changed everything. Cheers, everyone replied, glasses clinking in a toast that was much more than words. It was a celebration of journeys, of sacrifices, of love that persisted when everything said to give up. After lunch, while the adults rested in the shade of the garden and chatted lazily, Ethan sought out Robert for a private conversation. They walked to the back of the garden, where there was a small bench under a tree. Uncle Robert, there's something I want to tell you, and you're the first one I'm telling, even before Dad. What is it? Jessica and I are planning to start our own humanitarian organization, specifically focused on bringing medical care and supplies to riverine communities in the Alaskan wilderness. It would be small at first, just the two of us and maybe a few more volunteers, but I think we can make a real difference. Ethan, that's amazing, but it's going to be difficult, expensive, risky. I know, and that's why I'm telling you first, because you understand what it means to pursue a dream even when it's scary. You did that with my father, and I want your honest opinion. Do you think I'm being naive? Robert thought carefully before answering. No. I don't think you're being naive. I think you're being brave. And I think you and Jessica have exactly the skills and passion needed to make this work. Will it be hard? Yes. Will there be times when you question if you made the right choice? Absolutely. But if you face it together, if you keep communication open, if you don't let pride or fear paralyze you, you have every chance of success. Would you invest in something like this? Robert smiled. I'm already mentally writing the check, and I know your father will want to participate too. Emily will probably offer help with the administrative part. Sarah will want to provide food for your missions. This family won't let you do this alone. Ethan hugged Robert tightly. Thank you. For everything. For stopping that day on the plane. For looking at me and seeing someone worth helping. For giving my father a second chance. For being the glue that held all of us together. Ethan, you thank me as if I did a huge favor. But the truth is, you saved my life as much as I saved anything in yours. Before I met you, I was existing, not living. You gave me purpose. You gave me a real family. You gave me a reason to wake up every day and make a difference. They returned to the garden where the family was waiting for them, and there, under the afternoon sun, surrounded by all the people he loved, Robert felt a deep peace. He had made mistakes in his life, had hurt people, had let pride and fear dictate choices. But he had also learned, grown, redeemed himself, and most importantly, he had loved and been loved. The story that had begun with a boy eating leftover food on a plane wasn't a story about poverty or hardship. It was a story about human connection, about seeing someone, truly seeing, when it would be easier to look the other way. It was about choosing to care when it would be more comfortable not to get involved. It was about forgiveness, redemption, and the transformative power of unconditional love. Years kept passing. Ethan and Jessica opened their humanitarian organization and thrived, making a measurable difference in dozens of communities. Sophie became a commander at 24, one of the youngest in her company, and began teaching on weekends, following in Robert's footsteps. David finalized and published his memoir, which sold modestly but deeply touched those who read it. Sarah expanded her business even further, employing people from underprivileged communities and offering professional training. Robert and Emily traveled, finally having time to see the world beyond professional obligations. They visited places they had dreamed of seeing, created memories they would treasure forever. But they always returned to Chicago, to the family that was their true home. 25 years after that initial flight, Robert was sitting in a rocking chair in his house, a book in his lap but not really reading. His mind was wandering through memories, through all the chapters of a life well lived. Emily was sitting beside him, knitting something for the baby that Ethan and Jessica were expecting. It would be the first grandchild of the extended family, a new generation beginning. "What are you thinking about?" asked Emily, noticing her husband's distant look. "I'm thinking about how strange life is, how one moment can change everything. If I had simply walked past that boy on the plane, if I hadn't stopped to look, to care, none of this would have happened. I would be alone, or at least much lonelier. I wouldn't have this wonderful family. I wouldn't have seen Ethan grow up and become the incredible man he is. I wouldn't have mentored Sophie. I wouldn't have rebuilt my friendship with David. I wouldn't have experienced this love, this connection, this purpose. But you stopped. You saw. You cared. And that made all the difference. It really did. Sometimes I wonder why I stopped. What made me look at that boy among so many passengers? I think some things have no rational explanation. Maybe it was destiny. Maybe it was chance. Or maybe it was simply you being who you are deep down, someone who cares, someone who sees people and not just faces. Robert held Emily's hand, intertwining fingers wrinkled by years but still firm. "I'm grateful. For everything. For the mistakes I made because they taught me, for the difficulties we faced because they strengthened us, and especially for the people who came into my life and made everything worthwhile." The following week, the whole family gathered again, this time at the hospital where Jessica was giving birth. The delivery was difficult, hours of intense labor, but eventually a strong cry announced the arrival of a healthy boy. Ethan came out of the delivery room with tears in his eyes, carefully holding his son in his arms. "Family, I want to introduce Jacob Robert Johnson. Jacob for the boy who changed everything. Robert in honor of the man who saved our family." Robert couldn't hold back tears upon hearing his name being given to his grandson. When Ethan placed the baby in his arms, he looked at that little face and saw the future. He saw possibility. He saw the continuation of a legacy, not of money or status, but of love, family, and doing what's right. "Welcome to the craziest family in the world, Jacob," Robert whispered to the baby. "You have so much adventure waiting for you, so many people who will love you, so much love around you that you'll never feel alone." Sophie came and looked in wonder at her nephew. "One day I'll teach you to fly, little one. I'll show you that the sky has no limits when you have wings of courage and a heart full of love." David held his grandson with reverence, his hands trembling slightly with emotion. "You'll never go through what your father went through. You'll never feel abandoned or worthless, because we'll make sure, this whole family, that you grow up knowing you're loved, that you're important, that you have a place in this world." Sarah kissed her grandson's forehead, her tears falling on the tiny face. "I'll tell you all the stories, about how your father was the bravest boy in the world, about how he saved our family even though he was so small, about how love can heal even the greatest pains." Emily watched the scene with deep satisfaction. That family which had formed in such an unlikely way was now celebrating a new life, a new beginning, a new generation to carry forward the legacy of love and resilience. In the following years, Jacob grew up surrounded by more love than any child could ask for. He had dedicated parents in Ethan and Jessica, doting grandparents in David and Sarah, honorary uncles, grandparents in Robert and Emily, and an amazing aunt in Sophie, each one contributing to his upbringing, each one offering unique perspectives, valuable lessons, unconditional love. Robert remained involved in the family's life, even when his health began to decline in the following years. He was aging, his body not as strong as it had been, but his spirit still vibrant. He spent hours telling Jacob stories about aviation, about adventures, about the importance of always seeing people, truly seeing them, especially those others ignore. "Grandpa Robert, tell me the story again of how you met my dad," Ethan would ask, who at 5 years old never tired of hearing that story. And Robert would tell it, each time with small variations, but always preserving the essence. The story of a lonely boy eating leftover food and a pilot who decided to stop and care. The story of how a moment of compassion changed the course of multiple lives. The story of redemption, forgiveness, and family built on choice more than blood. When Ethan turned 6, Robert was sick. His heart, which had been treated for years, was finally reaching the end of its capacity. The doctors were clear that there wasn't much more they could do beyond keeping him comfortable. Robert accepted the news with surprising calm. He had lived a full life, had loved and been loved, had made a difference in the world. He had no significant regrets. The family gathered around him in his final days. David rarely left his friend's side, holding his hand, reminiscing about decades of memories. Sarah brought home-cooked food, even when Robert could barely eat. Emily was always present, her love constant until the end. Ethan and Jessica brought Jacob for brief but frequent visits, wanting Robert to know he was surrounded by family. Sophie, now 26 and a respected pilot, spent all her time off beside the uncle who had been her mentor and practically a second father. "Uncle Robert, you're going to get better, right? You have to see when I become a captain. You have to be there on my first international flight as captain." Robert smiled weakly. "Soph, even if I'm not there physically, I'll be there in other ways. Every lesson I taught you, every moment we spent together, will be there with you. You'll feel me every time you put your hands on the controls. But it's not the same. I need you here. You don't need me anymore to validate your talent, Sophie. You're an amazing pilot on your own merit, and you'll keep being amazing with or without me physically present. But my love, my belief in you, that will never go away." On his last night, Robert asked to see the whole family. They crowded into the hospital room, violating visitation rules, but no one had the heart to send them away. Robert looked at each face, memorizing details, storing final moments. "Thank you," he said, voice weak but clear, "for giving me purpose, for loving me even when I didn't deserve it, for being my true family. You turned the last 27 years of my life into something magical." He looked specifically at Ethan. "You changed everything, Ethan. That boy eating leftover food saved me as much as I saved you. Never forget that. Keep making a difference, keep seeing people, keep loving without fear." And then, surrounded by everyone he loved, Robert closed his eyes for the last time. There was no struggle, no visible pain, just a smooth transition, one last breath, and he was gone. The funeral was huge. Former students came from across the country to pay their respects. Co-workers shared stories about his generosity and passion for teaching, but the ones who really mattered were in the front row. David, who had lost not just a friend but a brother. Emily, who had lost the love of her life. Ethan, Sophie, Sarah, Jessica, Jacob. The family Robert had helped create, and that had given meaning to his final years. During the funeral, it was Ethan who gave the main eulogy. Robert Anderson wasn't perfect. He made mistakes like all of us. But what defined him wasn't his mistakes, but how he corrected them. When he saw me on the plane 27 years ago, he could have passed by. It would have been easier, less complicated. But he stopped. He saw. He cared. And that choice changed not only my life, but the lives of everyone here today. Ethan's voice briefly faltered, but he continued. He taught me that family isn't defined by blood, but by choice. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. That it's never too late to fix a mistake, ask for forgiveness, start over. He taught me to fly, not just physically, but in every sense of the word. And I'll pass these lessons forward to my son, to everyone who comes to know our family. Because this way, Robert never truly leaves. He'll live in every choice we make to stop and see someone, to offer help without expecting anything in return, to love without conditions. After the funeral, the family gathered at David and Sarah's house. It wasn't a happy gathering, but it wasn't entirely sad either. It was reflective, full of shared memories, of stories told and retold. Jacob, too young to fully understand what was happening, felt the sadness around him, but also the love. So much love that he could feel it physically, a collective embrace that held everyone together. Weeks passed. The family slowly adjusted to Robert's absence. Emily was lost without him, but found comfort in continuing his work, in staying connected with the family that had become hers too. She offered to watch Jacob a few afternoons each week, finding joy in watching the boy grow, in sharing with him stories about the honorary grandfather he would barely remember, but whose legacy he would always carry. David struggled with the loss in a visceral way. Robert had been his anchor for so many years, the person who was always there during tough times. Without him, David found himself facing old demons of inadequacy and depression. But this time, he had an entire family to support him. Sarah was present in every difficult moment. Ethan called daily. Sophie visited whenever she could. Together, they helped David navigate the grief without getting lost in it. Ethan and Jessica honored Robert's memory by expanding their humanitarian organization. They created a fund in his name, specifically aimed at providing aviation training for youth from underprivileged communities. It was a way to keep Robert's spirit alive, his belief that aviation should be accessible to everyone who dreamed of flying. Sophie finally achieved her goal of becoming a captain. On her first flight as captain, she carried a photo of Robert in the cockpit. Before takeoff, she whispered a promise to always make him proud, to always use her skills for good, to always truly see people. Life went on, as it always does. Robert's absence was felt, a void that would never be completely filled. But his legacy lived on in every action of the family, in every choice of compassion over convenience, of love over fear. Jacob grew up hearing stories about the grandfather he never really knew, but who had shaped the family he was born into. At 10 years old, he declared that he wanted to be a pilot too, continuing the family tradition. Ethan and Jessica were supportive, but took care to ensure it was his dream, not just family pressure. "Dad, why did you want to be a pilot?" Jacob asked one night. "Because I wanted to fly high enough to see the whole world. I wanted perspective, to understand that there are people everywhere who need help. And because Grandpa Robert taught me that flying isn't just about machines and altitude, but about carrying hope, connecting people, making a difference." "And is that why you and Mom do the work of bringing medicine and food to people who need it?" "Exactly. We use our skills, our planes, to make the world a little better. It's what Grandpa Robert would have wanted. It's what I want too." "Then that's what I'm going to do when I grow up. I'm going to fly and help people. Like you, like Aunt Sophie, as Grandpa Robert used to do." Ethan embraced his son, feeling a profound continuity. The legacy that Robert had begun, which he himself had continued, was now being passed to the next generation. It was an unbreakable chain of love, compassion, and purpose. 30 years after that initial flight, the family was reunited again, this time to celebrate Sophie's wedding. She had met an aircraft mechanic during one of her flights, a kind and competent man who shared her passion for airplanes. The wedding was simple, reflecting Sophie's personality, but filled with love and joy. During the reception, David stood up to make a toast. He was older now, hair completely grey, but still had that sparkle in his eyes when he looked at his family. "My daughter is getting married," he began, voice choked, "and I can't help but think about how we got here. 30 years ago, I was at rock bottom. I had lost everything that mattered. My son traveled alone to find me, an 8-year-old boy eating leftover food on a plane because he had no money. He looked at Ethan, who now at 38 was sitting with Jessica and Jacob. That act of courage changed everything. It brought back my best friend. It rebuilt my family. It gave me a second chance to be the father I should have been from the start. and it allowed me to be present, to see my two children grow up and become amazing people. He turned to Sophie. Daughter, you are everything I could have dreamed of and more. You are strong, brave, talented. You take what you love, aviation, and use it to make the world better. And now you've found someone who loves you for who you are and supports your dreams. I couldn't be prouder. David raised his glass. This toast is for Sophie and Matthew, for love that sustains, for family that endures, and for the memory of Robert, who can't be here physically, but whose spirit permeates every moment of joy we share. Cheers! Cheers! The entire hall responded. Later that night, when most guests had left, the close family remained. Jacob, now 15 and incredibly similar to Ethan at the same age, was talking animatedly with Emily about flight theory. The 70-year-old lady still had a sharp mind and loved discussing complex concepts with her adoptive grandson. David and Sarah were dancing slowly in the corner, a couple who had survived storms and emerged stronger. Ethan and Jessica watched Jacob with pride, knowing they had raised a compassionate and intelligent young man. Sophie and Matthew were making plans for the future, dreaming of adventures yet to come. And in a quiet corner, invisible but present, Robert's memory watched the family he had helped save, rebuild, strengthen. Watched the legacy that kept growing, generations connected by unconditional love and choices of compassion. The story that had begun with a boy eating leftover food on a plane had transformed into a family saga of redemption, forgiveness, and love that transcended all difficulties. It was a story about seeing people, truly seeing them, when it would be easier to look away. It was about choosing to care even when it's inconvenient. It was about second chances and third chances and as many chances as needed, because true love doesn't give up. And in the end, it was a simple but profound story. Leftover food that turned into a banquet of hope, a moment of compassion that echoed through decades, an unlikely family that became the definition of true family. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story. Do you think Robert made the right decision by stopping to help Ethan that day? How would you have reacted if you were in his place? Share your thoughts in the comments with sincere words. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories that warm the heart. Your presence here makes all the difference to us. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end.